serious, people of Reddit, what are some of your unexplainable and creepy experiences? When I was little I had an extremely vivid dream. A building with a huge set of stairs leading up to 2 separate doors on either side. My dad and I sat on the stairs as I watched my sister and mother walk through the door on the right. Immediately I felt their lives were in danger, so, unbeknownst to my dad, I walked up the stairs and went to the door on the right. I was immediately face to face with a conductor whose flesh was falling off its bones, hair dangling from its scalp and eyes popping out of its sockets, conducting a loud unseen orchestra. I burst into tears and screamed, running out the building and past my dad. That's where the dream ended. Flash forward to 8th grade. My band class won a trip to Mackinac Island. We arrived at our hotel on Michigan's mainland, then made our way to the ferry. Landing on the island, my group opted for bikes, cars aren't allowed on the island, and started strolling through the streets. Then I saw it. The building in my dream. Huge steps, 2 doors on either side. Just as creepy looking now as it was in my dream. I stopped, not caring that my friends were riding ahead of me. I couldn't believe it. It was real. It had a sign that read "The Haunted Theater." It was a haunted house attraction, but I hated haunted houses, so why was this thing in my dream? The trip continued with weird déjà vu sitting in the back of my head. When I finally got home I asked my mom, did we go to Mackinac Island when I was a kid? She said yes. Did you and sis go in a creepy little haunted house? She said yeah, they did. I proceeded to tell her that all these years I thought it was a bad dream. She laughed and confirmed that, yes, it did happen, and I did get scared out of me trying to follow them into the attraction. Reality felt a little bent after that, lol. The attraction is still open today. I'd recommend it. Only had one that was truly beyond me. I was 19 at the time. Buddy of mine was on leave in the USMC visiting. Going to sleep I let him sleep in my bed and I took the couch. The couch was one of those L-shaped sectionals. The short part of the L was at my feet and there was an ottoman in front of the couch in that little area. Had one of those weird sleeps where I woke up before opening my eyes. When I opened them, I saw a creature standing right next to the ottoman. Like within arm's length. There was a light on in the hallway, so it was like a silhouette from the light behind it. Not enough light from the streetlight to make it super clear from the window behind me. It was about 3 to 4 feet tall. All I can remember from its features is it had super greasy hair covering most of its face. I saw it as soon as I opened my eyes, and I just closed my eyes back shut and turned around to face the back of the couch/window. I don't know how to describe it, but it was like the moment I saw it, my entire body was filled with terror/dread. As soon as I turned around I heard a loud whisper in my ear/thoughts, I saw you, see me, don't act like you didn't. Even more terrified. I just stayed silent, didn't move, and basically was praying until I eventually fell asleep. At some point I heard my buddy wake up and use the bathroom and lay back down. I probably would have forgotten about it except the next morning when eating breakfast, my friend mentioned how he woke up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom and felt like the house was haunted. Gave me the heebie-jeebies. I've had sleep paralysis, lucid dreams, false awakened dreams, and this wasn't like any of those. The only truly supernatural thing I ever saw that I couldn't explain away. When I was 15 I had a dream that I was looking up through the inside of a car and a woman walked past, stopped to look down at me and gave me a smile. I moved to the country to go to college and studied mechanical engineering, which required some hands-on work. In my second year, when I was 17, I was tasked with stripping a Mini for parts and after tipping it onto its roof as underneath stripping the handbrake cable out. I looked up and there was exactly the same woman who happened to be in my class from my dream 2 years previously smiling at me. Later that month we were having lunch when she mentioned that when she looked down she had the weirdest feeling. I told her about my dream and it turned out she had had the same dream from the other angle. I was raised off-grid on an uninhabited mountain, except for my family. We were the first established homestead on that mountain ever, and first residents since the early 1900s miners left. The log home we built was located about a half a mile down from a deserted mining camp. There is still little published history recording of that camp's journey up there, or who mined there. It was in operation for roughly 15 years and boasts about 9 cabins. The camp has traded hands many times since I was a child. I used to hike to it and play around the cabins. I remember in the most intact cabin, there had been a notebook. I read passages from not only the current owner, but also one of the past owners recounting tales of the little blue girl. Later, I found remnants of an old children's fort built with a 1900s handmade cabin door hung in a mistletoe fir tree for a treehouse. One night when we all came home, we cleared dirt and built a fresh home, no bones or artifacts. One fall evening, as we entered through the mudroom into the house, we all heard a strange noise. We looked at the front door going to the front porch, and the deadbolt was locking and unlocking very fast. It takes some muscle to lock and unlock a deadbolt. It quit, I said, Mom. She walked up to the front door, opened it, and there was nothing there. She shut the door, the deadbolt locked and unlocked and remained still. It was just the wind. She spoke. And it never happened again. Years later, in my mid-20s, I was taking a family friend for a horseback ride. We walked along, enjoying the early spring day and the horses, chatting about whatever came to mind. Suddenly, about 40 yards off, we heard a little girl laugh loudly. My friend smiled and said, "Oh, you have children up here." I shook my head and replied, "No, we don't. There isn't another soul for a few miles, no children until well after that." She seemed to turn a bit pale, then asked, "Well, what was that?" I sat quietly. I thought I knew what it was, that I had had my first encounter with the little blue girl. But not wanting to spook my friend or sound crazy, I just said, "I don't know." We continued our ride and had no issue. One more weird thing about my mountain is not very often but unexpected I have experienced this really awful feeling. Like something evil is close. I was having a chat with an older gent who was an avid outdoorsman and overall tough guy who owns property up there, and we started talking about strange happenings up there. I asked him about the evil feeling, thinking he'd laugh at me and poke fun, but to my surprise, he got dead serious. He recounted a time he was in his cabin, and in his words, "He am not scared." All of a sudden he said it was like the darkness outside got even darker, and he became terrified. He said the hairs on his arms stood up, and he had half a mind to get in his truck and leave. He admitted he had never felt like that before and was glad I'd said something because he thought maybe something was wrong with him. He mentioned it had lasted about 10 to 15 minutes but felt like an eternity. We have no clue what that is. When I was in 5th grade, I went to science camp on a mountain in California. We had a night hike that was supposed to teach us about the different cells in our eyes, so we did it without any flashlights at all. Our eyes adjusted to just starlight, and it was actually pretty cool. Until the counselors made us walk a stretch of the path alone, one by one. We were 10 of us, and at least some of us were still afraid of the dark. Me, so I was far too anxious to listen properly to the instructions. One counselor went ahead through the bushes and radioed for the other to start sending kids. My turn comes up, and I drag my feet down the path. Until I hit a fork. I vaguely remember the counselor saying something about it. Or was I remembering wrong? Which way was I supposed to go? Was it even a fork or was I just not able to see properly in the dark? Mind you, this was a pitch-black mountain in California with nothing around for miles other than the camp. I didn't want to get lost. I looked behind me, briefly considering going back the way I came to admit that I didn't listen, but when I turned back to the fork there was a man standing there. He was Asian, wearing wireframe glasses and a white t-shirt. It was barely 50 on the mountain. I wasn't scared, I felt no malice from him. If anything, I was relieved to not be alone in the dark anymore. He gestured for me to go one way, so I did. Rejoined the rest of my class and the counselor radioed to send the next kid. I didn't think anything of it for the rest of the trip. It took me until I was on the bus ride home, reflecting on the hike, to realize that I'd never seen him before. He wasn't one of the counselors leading the hike, he never came out with us, and he never emerged from the bushes after all the kids had done their solo walk. I have no idea who or what he was. 12 years ago, on a road trip back from a Blink-182 concert in LA. We were driving east through Arizona, headed back to Ohio on a 33-hour road trip because the other guy just loved blinking so much that somehow we had to do this massively long trip for just one concert. But that's unimportant, the real point was spending time with these two girls lol. I was driving at the point this happened. Middle of nowhere, middle of the night, we come to a stop behind a bunch of cars waiting for some construction. The four of us were talking for a bit as we sat there, two girls, two guys, and I distinctly remember rotating yellow lights on the construction vehicles and lots of red light from all the rear car lights. A few songs played while we're joking, laughing, one girl was smoking. Eventually, we were like, haven't we been here forever, and we started looking around. It's construction, who knows what the delay is. So, we wait. Gets on 20 minutes, 30 minutes. Eventually I'm like, are the construction cats even moving? I get out of the car, there are orange cones lined up everywhere, I'm picking my way through. There's nobody in the construction vehicles. They're just sitting there. I'm like, you what, this traffic jam is pointless, we need to just go around, and I look at the other cars to try to tell the drivers. There was nobody in the cars either. We'd just been sitting in a traffic jam in the middle of nowhere in the middle of the night behind a bunch of cars and construction vehicles that were on, but nobody was in them. I jumped back in the car, and we took off like a bat out of hell. But to this day I have no clue what that was about. Not a hallucination, I wasn't asleep, all four of us saw this. Looking in other cars and seeing nobody in any of them. I didn't stop to see if there were tracks in the sand or anything. I grew up in a really old house that my mom inherited from her parents. Since it was pretty old, the house grew organically over the decades as more rooms were added as needed, so that by the time we lived there it was pretty big. I have several older siblings, so the bedroom assignation changed a lot over the years as they moved out to go to college, and that by the time I was in junior high the only ones living there besides my parents were me and one of my brothers, who was at the time a college freshman but still lived at home because his college was located in the same city. Anyway, this one weekend my parents were out of town and only me and my brother were home, but he was out partying with his friends, so I was home alone on a Saturday night playing SNES in my bedroom. Now, my bedroom was upstairs and had two entrances. One that led to the hallway, and another one that led to a staircase that led to a sort of attic whose function had often changed over the years from a bedroom for some of my siblings, to a TV room/entertainment center, to a place to store stuff, and back again, and so on, as needed. At the time this took place, it was being used more like a traditional attic and it was full of old junk and the stuff my older siblings had left behind after moving out but hadn't yet gotten around to taking to their respective homes. So, there I was playing SNES when at around 1 a.m. I started hearing someone whispering from the other side of the door that led to the attic room. Tough stretch. Tough stretch, open up. Now, that room had another entrance that led to the garage, so I figured my brother was back from partying and he was drunk and had decided to pull a prank on me and scare me, so I decided to scare him in return. Since the door was locked on my side, I decided to make my way around by going downstairs and stealthily entering the attic from behind and scaring my drunk brother. The thing is, when I got to the kitchen I could see through the window in the door that led to the garage that my brother's car wasn't there. I went to our front door to check if his car was parked outside in our driveway, but it wasn't. Since I had a pretty good view of our block in either direction from there, unless he'd parked around the block as part of his prank, he clearly wasn't home yet. Unless he'd gotten a bit drunk and had decided to leave his car behind and get a ride home, that is, and I wasn't going to fall for that. So, I went into the garage still thinking it was a prank, but when I got to the door that led to the staircase that led to the attic-like room, I could see that it was not only closed, but also locked from my side. Puzzled, I went back to my room, turned on the lights, unpaused my game, and went back to playing. The whispers kept calling me by name and insisting that I should open the door for a while longer, but I simply pretended I didn't hear anything because I just didn't know what else to do. I was 14 years old or so at the time and my brain was struggling with making sense of what was going on because either someone that somehow knew my name, and for some reason was using both my first and middle name when addressing me, had broken into my attic and gotten trapped there somehow, or something even weirder was going on. This was back when cell phones weren't a thing, as you might surmise from the fact that I was playing SNES, so I couldn't call my brother or anything like that, and calling the cops from our landline never even crossed my mind as a valid option. I mean, what was I going to say? After like 20 minutes the whispers finally stopped, and at around 3 a.m. my brother got home still a bit buzzed from his night out, and I asked him if he had come home earlier and tried to prank me, but he was genuinely confused and got even more scared than me when I told him the story. We ended up sleeping in his room that night because neither of us wanted to be alone, regardless of the fact that he was already a grown-ass man at the time. Nothing more happened that night, and I never experienced anything quite like that ever again in that house, though there were some other strange things over the years. I'm not really a believer in the supernatural, but to this day I have no idea what the hell was going on that night, and I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I'd opened the door. When I was a teenager, in the 90s, I lived in a really old house with my parents. It was so old that it still had skeleton key locks on most of the doors. It was a strange house that had had some even stranger previous owners. The last of which had decided to remove both the tub and the door of the upstairs bathroom downstairs. See, the house had a basement that had at some point in time been turned into a fully separate apartment. It had a kitchen sink, a full, large bathroom, 2 gigantic walk-in closets, and even its own entrance/exit that led out to some stairs that climbed up into the backyard. The place was supposedly haunted according to the deed. An old man and an old woman, no relation, separate owners, had both died in the house. The man had died of natural causes downstairs in the back bedroom sometime in either the 60s or 70s. The woman had died upstairs, but we never found out how or when. Either way I believed it because that basement was creepy to be alone in. And since the crazy lady who owned it previously had moved the only tub downstairs, we had to bathe down there. You constantly felt like you were being watched. I hated it. One of those aforementioned closets, the first one which was located directly under the stairs and ran the length of the entire house. It was a long, narrow stone-walled closet with wooden shelves running the length of it. We stored Christmas decorations and stuff in there. And as a kid it scared the hell out of me because I swore I always heard something moving around in there. But I'd open its old door, turn on the light by its pull chain and peer in to see nothing, of course. Anyway, back to when I was a teen. It was Christmas Eve and I had been up with my mom helping her bake cookies. My dad and my younger brother were both already asleep. My mom and I were talking when watching A Christmas Story on repeat, as it does so every Christmas on one of the channels. We suddenly hear this loud crunching explosion followed by 2 thunderously loud thuds. It came from downstairs. This woke my dad up immediately, who came out into the living room wide-eyed and clutching a baseball bat. We explained what had just happened and he decided to go downstairs to investigate and told us to grab the phone and be ready to dial the police. Me, being a macho teenager, couldn't just let him go alone, so I tagged along behind him after he started to descend the basement steps. We get down there and turn off the staircase to see the heavy oak door of the closet has been torn straight off its hinges and thrown across the hallway. It had collided with a brick support pillar that hid the water heater. The bricks and the stone walls down there were painted a dark brown for some reason, and we never changed it. The door was painted white. It had hit the pillar so hard that it left white paint on it and chipped off some of the brown paint from the brick. We could see one of top corners of the wood mangled and smashed in. The hinges were absolutely wrecked too. The metal was twisted and snapped. No human could have done that. It was a heavy real oaken door. And it had been so violently flung open that it had torn straight through the metal hinges as if they were made of plastic. Then collided so forcefully with the brick pillar across the hallway that it chipped paint and destroyed that corner of the door that had made contact. Mind you, this wasn't a narrow hallway either. It was a decently wide hallway, a good 8 to 10 feet wide. There was nothing inside of the closet, but it was ransacked. The wooden shelves were torn down and the junk in there was thrown all around the room. Even the light cord was torn off, just leaving the small chain that flipped the switch. We never did find out what had caused that mess. It never happened again either. To this day I can't explain it. Other weird stuff happened there during my stay there, which was into my early 20s. But this one was the weirdest and hardest to try to rationalize. My friend and I were driving home on a clear night. We came around a bend and I saw what looked to be an old man, red flannel with jeans, bent over in the road walking slowly. We both screamed in unison, and she slammed on the brakes. I had closed my eyes because I thought for sure we would hit him. When I opened my eyes it was a buck. I looked at her and she said, "I swear to God, that was a man." She described him identical to what I saw. We were shaking and the buck stared at us for a second before running off. I was standing in a well-lit courtyard right by a road in a small village with a group of friends. There was some kind of tamed raven that had been flying from person to person all night. It was beside a live music venue, but nobody knew who it belonged to. Nobody local had ever seen it before either. Suddenly, it flew from someone's shoulder right into the path of a car. My friends and I all saw this bird hit the front left wheel, a thud, an explosion of feathers, then disappear. We gasped, reacted as you would, turned to each other. Then we saw the raven on a table behind us, hopping onto someone else's shoulder. Untouched, unbothered, the same unusually friendly behavior as before. All my friends saw the same thing. Only around half of us were drinking at all, and I was stone cold sober. I have never been able to explain exactly what happened there. A horrible uneasy feeling came over me. Something didn't line up correctly at all in that series of events, and I felt terribly aware of that fact in a way I could not shake. When I moved to a new state, I started a new career as a nursing assistant, which quickly turned into a hospice aftercare. All the women who worked the night shift with me were too terrified of the dead bodies to clean them for the morgue, so it became my thing if someone died on my shift to prepare the bodies. I did this for 4 years and became very used to it. Within this time, I had heard 2 disembodied voices that really stuck with me. The first one was a disembodied voice that whispered thank you in my ear. To be honest, I heard disembodied voices a few times before this and chalked it up to working long hours and being sleep deprived, but that was the first time I had heard actual words. The most terrifying time was when a coworker asked me to help her talk biohazards to a dumpster outside. It was about 5 a.m., so it was still dark outside, and she didn't want to be alone in the dark. I told her sure, no problem, and we were just talking and walking out to the bins. We were halfway back from the bin towards the building when we both heard a disembodied voice scream out my name. I turned because it was so loud it sent chills down me, but once again I was going to ignore it thinking I'm crazy till my coworker said, "Didn't you hear that?" It was then I realized the voices weren't my mind playing tricks on me. I have no idea what either of them were, but I continued working there for 2 more years before I left. My mom, brother-in-law, sisters, and I were watching a movie in the living room of my grandparents' old Victorian home. It was nighttime and the lights were out. Totally dark except for the movie. All of a sudden the old sconce light on the wall in the adjoining dining room came on. We all knew those lights hadn't worked for years. We were all eerily silent. Out of the dark we heard my mom's voice say, "Nana, turn the light off, you're scaring the kids." Nana is my grandmother that lived there before she died. Immediately the light goes off. We all jumped up and on top of my 5-foot-tall mom's lap. Even my brother-in-law faced with tears of joy later, after we all calmed down, we flipped that light switch on and off. Still didn't work. When I was in college I went on a study abroad that traveled to Turkey and Europe. One night we were in Athens and my friends, and I decided to walk down to a tourist area with a bunch of shops. It was about a 30-minute walk. We did some shopping for a few hours, then decided to head back. We took off and noticed a stray dog following us, yellow lab if I remember correctly. We laughed and thought it was because one of my buds bought €1 to take back to his hotel room and thought the dog could smell it. But this dog kept following us for blocks. Then, the dog started walking in front of us, but seemingly knew where we were going. It was not a direct shot back to our hotel, so we had to turn down a few streets, and I kid you not, this dog made every turn, left or right, before we did. We even did a pit stop at a coffee shop and the dog laid down and then jumped back up as soon as everyone was back outside ready to go. We finally get close to our hotel and the dog runs up to the sliding doors, sits down, and waits for all of us to walk in. I'm the last one through the door, and while I'm looking back at the dog, tripping out, the dog takes one last look at us all and then just walks away. It was the strangest, yet oddly comforting, thing. I was like 8 lying in bed trying to sleep once when the cupboard door in my room flew open really hard. I jumped out of bed and went crying to my mom, but she said something on the inside was probably pressed against it causing it to fly open. The thing is, this door was really difficult to open. You had to pull on it super hard to actually get it to unlatch. I have no idea how it flew open with such violent force, it makes no sense. Definitely the only paranormal thing I've ever experienced. I was babysitting my niece in my brother's 100-year-old home. It was literally my first day living with them as a nanny. There is a front door and a back door, and lots of windows. My niece was asleep upstairs in her crib, and I was on the couch in the living room when I heard the front doorbell ring. I don't know the neighbors and decided not to answer the door. A few minutes later I heard pounding at the back door. Now I'm startled. Complete silence other than the pounding. At this point I'm scared and think, what if someone's having an emergency? So, I take a hand mirror and carefully stick it in the little doorway by the back door so I can see who is there without being seen. It's an old man dressed in about 30 coats. I go into the dining room and peek through the blinds. He has this long skinny stuff, like a little thicker than a pencil, covered in bright patterns, and something is smoking from the top of it, like incense or something. He's trying to look in the back door window. I'm totally disturbed, so I run up to my niece's bedroom and text my brother and sister-in-law to ask if they've ever seen this guy. They have not. For the next half hour, he goes back and forth from the front door to the back door, continually knocking/ringing the doorbell. What was scary is it's the middle of the day and I didn't have any lights on, the curtains are drawn, so I don't know why he thought someone was home unless he somehow saw me through a crack in a blind or something. He never came back. I was walking to work one morning at about 4 a.m., the dead quiet hour. As I came up to a fairly well-lit intersection, I saw a cyclist coming up the crossroad at a pace that would get them to the intersection at the same time, so I slowed down a little to let them pass without killing their momentum. As they passed, I saw two things really clearly right under the streetlight. First, this thing was like 8 feet tall. It was riding a normal-sized adult bike, but looked like it was on a kid's bike with its legs bent and coming up so high. Then it turned its face to look at me, and its face traced me as it kept riding along, seemingly not looking where it was going. Like its head was turning like an owl following me. There were giant black holes where the eyes should have been, and its mouth was stretched across and up both sides of its face in a terrifying smile/grimace with the corners of its mouth way up on its forehead. I just quickened my pace and didn't look back. Haven't told a whole lot of people about it either because I figure they'd just brush it off as well. It was dark out. But I know what I clearly saw. What I believe to have been a case of falling asleep behind the wheel could also have been a serious case of confusion led on by sleep deprivation. I was living in Hawaii, but in Minnesota, visiting my family for a bit. A friend of mine named Chaz and I decided to go out and engage in some scenery, similar to the high school pranking we did our senior year. Long story short, we get back to my house at 5 a.m. for a 2-hour nap. We decided to buy 4 packs of cigarettes, 4 Rockstar punched energy drinks, and take a 2-hour road trip to the Mall of America. We get there, ride a few roller coasters, eat at crazy restaurants, and endure a scavenger hunt created by group at the mall for the day. We left and decided to drive around Minneapolis and all over a few of the suburbs. We start to head back to the town we are from when we get a call from our friend, who is a blackjack dealer at one of the nearby casinos. He says he is off early and wants to come hangs out. We tell him we are 45 minutes out but will be there as quickly as we can. So, we drove over there to get him. We get off the freeway and take the back roads. There's not a single car out there. It is pitch black. Then, out of nowhere, there is a speeding pair of headlights coming towards us in our lane. Blaring the horn in an attempt to warn the vehicle it is in the wrong lane, the headlights disappear. Suddenly, they are 30 feet in front of us, and there is semi-horns blarely in unison. I shut my eyes, thinking it is the end of my life. My eyes open, and we are sitting in the casino parking lot. My friend Dave is walking out to the car, excited as always to see us. Chaz and I haven't really comprehended what has happened. While we were both very conscious and saw the lights and heard the sounds, what we didn't understand was the passage of time that occurred in the blink of an eye. Almost a half hour of my life is gone, and I cannot explain how or why. I was getting some food with a coworker after our shift. My buddy dropped a fry and we both had lights behind us. So, our shadows overlapped at one part. So, this fry falls in between our shadows and we both move out of the way to see it for some reason. As we moved and the fly, which we could still see mind you, as the light touched it, completely disappeared. Like full-on glitch in the Matrix. We were both tripping out because we saw it happen right before our very eyes. I've had terrible sleep paralysis sometimes. I've seen so many different things. Tall dark man in my doorway. Short dark man that ran on all fours in my doorway. Squid by the side of my bed. Glowing orbs above me. Women in a wedding dress walking in the next room. Glowing centipedes in my blanket. Glowing ants on my floor. A dog on my floor. A tall man at the foot of my bed. A red and black spider on my nightstand. And I think that's it. My wife sees things when she wakes up in the middle of the night, but she doesn't get the paralysis bit. She's seen cake coming through the ceiling. Various kinds of animals running around the room. A tree made out of rubbish. A stick insect on my sleeping face. A pair of trousers hanging over a door dancing like one of the advert flappy fan man things. Politicians in the room demanded lengthy written reports from her. Hunched creatures improbably balanced on things. Our own dog is on top of the wardrobe. One particular conversation that I had with my sister's childhood friend will always stay with me. My sister and I went over to her friend's house for the first time. We were 13 at the time. Her friend's mom was super nice, but in a kind of forced way. Her mom used to be an addict, and she had recently gotten sober, super religious, and maybe a bit too nice. No problem though, because it was better than the alternative. We, my sister, her friend's mom, and me, had dinner together and some polite conversation. After that we hung out in the friend's bedroom for the next few hours listening to music and just chatting. My sister and I exchanged looks sometimes because Stacy, the friend, was supposed to have a younger sister and a father at home, but we never saw them. I casually asked, "Hey, where's your sister, Ashley?" Stacy, "Oh, she's with one of her boyfriends, but I don't know which one." Okay, her sister is 11, but obviously the family was not too concerned about this. Eventually, I asked, "Where's your dad?" Stacy, "He's upstairs on his computer. He has an addiction." Me, "I am so sorry, Stacy. That's terrible." Stacy shrugged her shoulders and in a light-hearted, no big deal delivery, said, "Well, at least he's not going after me or my sister anymore." There was not a trace of sadness or anger in her voice, just a matter of fact. My sister and I kind of died in her room that night. We had heard of child abuse, but we never had personally met someone who had been abused. We could tell that Stacy just wanted to keep the mood light that night. We had found out later that Stacy and her sister were foster children for some time, while their parents went to jail and eventually into treatment. The girls came back to their parents because their parents were working on their issues. Hopefully, Stacy and Ashley are doing well today. I remember this was 2010 and I was in high school, and it was during roll call on an average sunny day. A bit windy but nothing unexpected. The teacher was trying to get everyone's attention. The ceilings in the classroom were plasterboard, then quickly row by row, each plasterboard shifted in unison. I'll never forget the sound jut. The classroom fell silent, and the teacher didn't even flinch. She just said, "Now that I have your attention." A few students laughed and said what was that was creepy, etc. Can't tell if it was the wind, a massive animal in the ceiling, or if my teacher had telekinesis or something. All I know is that I don't know what the bloody hell happened that day. I also don't think there was any construction going on in the ceiling, and I found it so weird they'd all shift like that. I feel I'm mostly a logical person and believe in science stuff, but this experience makes me totally believe in supernatural forces, because I can't explain it. When I was about 8 or 9, I went to a school friend's house for dinner. He had a cool house which backed onto this big field in our town. The field was mostly open, save for a few bushes and a hill, which at the top had a big tree with a rope swing and loads of thick bramble bushes behind the tree. It was summertime, and after dinner, around 6 p.m., we went into the field to go play on the rope swing at the top of the hill. Now, just a quick aside, a few months before, I'd been at the same friend's house and he introduced me to a friend called Liam, name changed, even though it probably doesn't matter. Back to the day in question. We were heading along the field towards the rope swing, when I spotted this guy on the rope swing, wearing all black. He was standing on the bit of wood you're meant to sit on, swinging back and forth, and beckoning/waving towards us with a hand gesture. I said, "Oh. That looks like Liam." And my friend agreed, and we quickened our pace. Liam was still waving at us. As we got a bit closer, I realized he was actually giving us the V symbol with his fingers, FU gesture, while also beckoning for us to join him with the same hand. Liam was a douche, so this was kind of his character. As we went up the hill, there were some bushes we had to move around. After we got past the bushes, we realized that Liam wasn't there anymore. We thought maybe he was hiding behind the tree. But we got right up to the rope swing and looked around, he wasn't there. The thing is, there was nowhere else for him to go. Behind the tree was a huge bramble bush that was too thick and prickly to hide in. And that backed onto a big brick wall that surrounded a private property at the top of the hill. Looking around, from the top of the hill, you could see basically the whole field below. Most of the bushes in the field were too small to hide behind. And there was no way he could have snuck past us on the way up. I was like, "I'm sure I saw someone up here?" And my friend agreed. But there was no one, and the rope swing was perfect still, like no one had used it in a while. I thought, must be a trick of the light or my imagination. But that's not the creepy part. At school a few months later, we were asked to write a short story about an interesting experience we had in our lives. I decided to write about the weird situation with the rope swing and what I saw. I mean, we were like 9 years old. This was probably the most interesting thing that had happened to me. A couple of days later, myself, my friend, and 2 other boys who lived in the same town as we were all asked to stay behind with the teacher at lunch break. She demanded to know why we'd all copied each other and whose idea it was, and how we thought that 4 people giving the same work wouldn't go unnoticed by her. We were all like, "What are you talking about?" She then handed us our stories from a few days before. We'd all written about exactly the same experience and had very similar stories. We all mentioned about it being a summer's evening, around 6 p.m., seeing a guy on the rope swing, dressed in black, doing the FU symbol with his fingers, and then disappearing when we got closer. The thing is, I could maybe understand my friend writing the same thing. But 2 other boys from the same town? And one of those boys didn't like my friend, so I can't imagine they'd come up with some weird conspiracy to make me look stupid, which would be extra weird considering we all got in trouble too. And they weren't that good of actors, they all looked genuinely confused. One of them asked if I'd copied him and I was like, "How? I don't sit near you." And all we spoke about it, and we discovered that we'd all had similar experiences, but on totally different days, except me and my friend, because we were together. One of them had seen it while walking his dog with his parents. Another had seen it while playing with some other non-school friends in the field. Our teacher, of course, didn't believe that we'd all genuinely have those experiences. To this day I just can't explain it. If I tell people this story, they think it's BS. But I'm telling you it happened. And since then, I believed in ghosts. Because I swear that's what we must have seen. So, I got a call from this random number the other day, and at first I thought they were some scammers or something, so I ignored it as I do most numbers I don't recognize. So, I go about my day and check my phone later to find that number called me another 7 times and the location that is displayed with the number had changed with every call even though it was the same number, and every location was getting closer and closer to where I live. So, this creeped me out and I blocked the number, and not even 5 minutes later did they call again even though it said they were blocked. This kept up all night until the next morning when I woke up to an ominous text in the morning from that number saying, "Good morning beautiful." This whole time that number was blocked, so the fact this happened while they were blocked creeped me out even more. I don't know if anyone can explain this, but it is currently creeping me out that they continue calling and sending messages. My aunt and uncle used to own an old house that was almost 100 years old at the time. They were getting ready to sell it and needed some help renovating it, so I volunteered and spent a couple weekends at their house. One day I was doing my laundry in their basement, and as I was getting ready to head back upstairs I saw a white misty figure that was probably around 5 feet 3 inches move like 5 to 6 feet in front of me from the bathroom to one of the bedrooms. A few months later I told my cousin about that experience. She grew up in that house and her bedroom was in that basement. She went pale and told me a bunch of stories that happened to her, one of them being that she saw an old lady sitting in one of the chairs down there and a split second later vanished. I'm from SW Washington State and have lived here all my life. One night when I was about 14, male, I was walking to the store with my friend. It was about a 35-minute walk each way through back neighborhoods. Now, both me and my friend were very skinny people. We didn't have our phones on us, and no weapons, just some cash. At about 1 a.m. we were walking down a dark street with little to no streetlights, quiet as can be. And all of a sudden my paranoia looks behind me and sees someone walking behind us. I thought it was really weird first and mentioned it to my friend. I told him to walk a bit faster. After we pick up the pace to the point where we are speed walking, I look behind me again, and the person is still following us, and is actually gaining on us slowly. For reference, this was a heavily obese person, if I had to guess, about 6 feet 2 inches 300 pounds. And I could see dark stains on his bright red shirt where he was sweating trying to keep up with us. He looked me directly in the eyes with a stare. I noticed an even darker walkway that led to a main road which I knew had apartments on it, and loudly said to my friend, "Oh, it's past curfew, Mom and Dad will start looking for us if we are too late, we have to run." And so we started running down this walkway onto the main road. After we make it to the main road, I look behind me again and the guy is gone. We got our drinks at the store and took a different and more trafficked route home. I still don't know what those guys' intentions were, but a few days later I saw a news story about a 13-year-old girl going missing. I never heard if they were found. I'm my old house. It was 125 years old when we bought it and lived there for around 13 years. The old man who had lived there did woodworking in the basement, and I'd always find random shelves. After a while I looked everywhere and assumed I used them all. Months later another one appeared in a spot right in front of things I swear it wasn't there. Sure, that could be I just missed it. But another thing in the basement was the longer I was down there the harder it got to breathe, yet my wife felt a more inviting aura. And this only ever happened to me and other men. But when walking up the stairs the door would slam shut on me and men as we got to the top. The door was slanted and would open on its own all the one, so it's weird it shut on us. We would see shadows in the kitchen while sitting at the bonfire. Pictures would fall off the wall and then into other rooms that there was no way they could have. My Funko Pop on a top shelf in corner, which had been there for over a year, flew off and across the room at me. I woke one night unable to move, feeling suffocated. There was this shadowy black creature on me, and when it noticed I saw it darted away into the corner. Another night I woke to pee, but when I looked across in the closet was a bunch of dark shadowy figures, some beast-like but all large. Standing in front of them was this young blonde girl wearing all white and glowing. It appeared as if she was holding the shadows in the closet. So, after buying the house we found out that the young woman we bought it from had held multiple seances in the house. When I was 13 years old, I was staying with my grandparents. Sometime in the early morning I woke up and looked out of the window from my bed. My grandfather walked past the window, stopped, turned toward me, and stared at me with nothing but an emotionless face. Completely vacant of any normal facial movements or anything. A few moments pass of us maintaining eye contact and he just keeps staring at me. It was wrong. The whole moment felt off. My heart starts to race, and I freak out. Something was clearly wrong. I jumped out of bed and sprinted up to my grandparents' bedroom. As I opened the door to tell my grandma, I see my grandpa sleeping soundly next to her in bed. I don't know what I saw that night, but it burned into my memory. The look on his face. The way he was looking at me. I hope I never see it again. This is a long story with a lot of details. So, I'm going to try to make it as short as possible. In high school, my buddy and our girlfriends would go on camping trips. We frequently camped in different spots on a lake called Mud Lake. We noticed after many trips out there that one of the islands, a circular island probably about 40 yards wide, in the lake had very sandy beaches on it. We had decided we'd make a weekend trip, and we would camp on the island so we wouldn't have to take our kayaks to the boat launch to go swimming. That Friday we got to the island at around 6 o'clock and all four of us kayaked. My girlfriend had forgotten something in the truck. So, her and my buddy's girlfriend left to go get it. It was about a 15-minute trip by kayaks to the island. So, we figured it wouldn't take them more than 45 minutes. My buddy and I finished setting up the entire camp, and we sat down in our hammocks and sparked a bowl. An hour had passed since they first left and we started to get worried, so I went to call them to see where they were at. The first call rang and there was no answer. The second call said I had no service. When I went to call a third time, my phone died. My buddy then got his phone out of his bag and went to call, but his phone was somehow dead as well. We decided to just keep waiting. Finally, we heard the girls' voices talking and giggling. We could hear the sound of the paddles cutting into the water with every stroke. We heard the kayaks hit sand and partially slide up on the beach. Then we heard nothing. We called out to the girls. No response. I went and checked it out, and the girls weren't on the island. I sat back down and sparked another bowl. By this time, it's completely dark. It would get dark around 9 to 9:30 at the time. Just as we were talking about kayaking back to the truck, we heard the girls giggling and talking again. The same thing as before. We hear them get on the island and then nothing. We both just kind of sat there, not knowing what to say. And then it happened again. Only about 5 minutes later this time. We then saw a light shining around the lake as if it was coming from a boat. We stood on shore and watched, thinking it was them and that my girlfriend had probably grabbed my headlamp from the truck. We sat back down. And we heard the girls come up to the island again. This time, I looked at my buddy, and he looked like he was freaking out. We talked for about 5 minutes about everything, trying to figure out if we were hearing and seeing the same thing. We had come to the conclusion that the weed we were smoking must be laced with something. Even though we had never had problems before with the same bag of weed. So, we decided that the next time we heard something, we would both point to exactly where we heard it come from. Right after saying this, we heard the girls approaching the island again. We both pointed in the exact same spot. We both went over to the shoreline, and we couldn't see them. We sat back down and again heard the girls, but this time in a different direction. We both pointed. We could clear as day hear their voices. Hear their laughs. Then, the intervals between the times that we would hear them began to shorten. From 5 minutes to 3 minutes to 30 seconds, and soon we started hearing them all around the island. We started to freak out as it felt like it was turning into chaos around us. Finally, it just went completely quiet. Everything seemed so still. We then heard a train whistle and a train coming as if it was less than a quarter mile away. Then the train just stopped, and we saw a fire on the shore of the mainland. We stood on the shore of the island looking, and we could see at least 6 to 8 people moving around the fire. My buddy yelled out to see if they were making all the noise. As soon as he yelled, we watched the silhouettes of the people we could see just stop, and the fire went out. I mean, the fire went out instantly. A few more weird things happened. But I'll skip to the end. Finally, my buddy and I were completely packing up camping and getting ready to get out of there. And we heard something behind us. Both of us snapped around so quickly. And it was our girlfriends standing there with confused looks on their faces. We looked at each other. Then back to the girls, then we turned back to each other really quick when we both realized it was still light out. The sun was still up. We were both certain it was at least 11 o'clock by that point. We tried our best to explain everything we could to the girls. The girls said it took them a little longer than usual because they swear they kayaked here, but they didn't see the island, so they figured they must have gone around the wrong bend. They said they ended up having to go back to the boat launch and check the maps to see where the island was. They claim they went there for the first time but didn't see it. We came to the conclusion that the girls were only gone for about an hour and a half. We arrived at 6. And we were off that island by 9. But it had felt like to us at the very least 4 to 5 hours. We all still talk about it when we get together. None of us can explain what happened. We have even gone and talked to local tribe elders in the area. We have talked to one tribe's medicine man, and he had a few ideas but wasn't sure. I've had all kinds of theories. But one theory seems to keep popping up. I won't say it just because if anyone has anything to say on this, I want to hear honest opinions. Creepy. Last February I had just gotten done with a 2-day ayahuasca journey with the intent purpose of getting clean from a several years long crystal meth addiction. Up until that point I was continuously relapsing and had already gone to treatment for 60 plus days several months before that and still couldn't kick it. I had been banging meth in a hotel the week before I was supposed to participate in the plant medicine journey and was able to detox for 5 days and drive myself down to Houston for it. It was really kind of a Hail Mary pass type situation at that point, but it actually went really well. I really felt like something changed that weekend, and indeed it did, as I've been sobered ever since. When I got back I wasn't staying at my house because I was worried about relapsing for a few different reasons, so for a couple months I stayed with a close friend 45 minutes away to give me a better chance of staying clean. One evening she needed the house to herself to get laid and I didn't want a cock blocker, so I decided I felt strong enough to go back to my house because the guy who rented from me, also a tweaker, was out of town and I figured it would be good to spend the night with my cats. So I decided what the hell. As soon as I got to the house something felt extremely off and sinister, but I shrugged it off. I had a motion sensor blink camera upstairs in the master bedroom pointed at my safe that kept going off and alerting my phone, and I would go up and clear my room, but there was nothing up there. At this point I was a little freaked out, but I just told myself I would stay downstairs and keep the lights on. I'm sitting on my leather chair with my cat in my lap and suddenly she does a double take and notices something directly behind me, jumps off my lap and runs to the opposite corner of the room and backs up into the wall with her hair standing up on end, staring at something behind me. I really don't know what it was all about, but there was definitely something in that home and it felt extremely angry that night. Makes sense, because that house was basically a portal to hell with all the 4 meth-used and various seedy characters that hung out there. I loved playing basketball and would always go up to the basketball court in the apartments I lived in. I would only leave when it got dark enough I couldn't see. I stopped going up there because I went through a traumatic experience there when I was 11. When I was 16, I decided to face my trauma and go back. I was playing basketball and decided to leave because it was getting dark and the court is almost completely surrounded by woods. As I turned to leave I saw something move, so I turned to look. Just at the edge of the woods I saw an 11-year-old me standing there crying. I ran and refused to go there unless it's completely daylight outside or I'm with multiple people. Let me first give you a basic picture/understanding about how our house is constructed. Main entrance/guest room west side. Hall central part. My room east side, exactly opposite to main entrance room. Dad's room left side of my room. This is like a decade ago when my dad used to go to mosque for morning prayers. One day, I was sleeping in the hall, on a sofa. The sofa was located in the middle area of the hall, like a traffic pole stood in the middle of X roads. So, I saw with blurry eyes that Dad came in, went past me, entered into his room, changed his clothes, couple of minutes or less, exited his room and went in my room. And the very next moment, within a second, I saw Dad, real one, coming into the house from the main entrance. I was shell-shocked. I told Dad about what I saw. He just laughed a bit. I was dead sure that Dad knew what was in and around the house. Since after that, we encountered many paranormal activities but nothing harmful at all. Ours is a joint family. Each one of the family members know about these things, but we hardly talk about it. Maybe a good spirit wandering around. Back in September I was going up this one hill in a community trail to get back home. It's steep but it turns into this road on a winding path. It's still in the forest, but people's backyards connect onto it. Think something like this, but gravelier. So, I turned off the podcast I was listening to as I was heading up by. It was pitch black out and I know coyotes walk even the neighborhoods, so better keep my senses uninterrupted. Also turned on the phone flashlight because you legit couldn't see 2 steps ahead of you. So, I get maybe 2 minutes into this walk just down this trail and yeah, it looks similar enough to that linked photo. It's quiet as hell out there even though it's only been like 10 minutes since the last passerby. Well, I get halfway through a straight part of the trail when randomly I see the branches and bushes behind me illuminated with light. It's headlights following me. But they're still around the corner, so I don't know if they saw me. That flashlight toggle on the phone got turned off. Not doing that. I figure the absolute best case scenario, trail patrol, is nowhere near worth changing the worst case. So, I just book it for like 2 kilometers straight and I lose them. No callouts for me or anything, they were just like 100-150 behind me, so I had hopes about not being seen yet. I slow down for a bit once I know I'm not being followed, just spending my energy wisely, not trying to risk losing breath if it comes down to a chase. The headlights come back. So, this time I literally just bailed out into the bushes off to the side, and now I'm sort of looking up at the road, so I'd blend in if the car or whatever it was drove past. It also gave me an out, like I could legit slide down 200 voluntarily if I needed to and stick the landing. But here's the weird thing, it didn't. So, I'm laying prone waiting for anything staying as put as I can. It's already too late to make a move, and any movement will be heard easily. The headlights turn off and I hear people talking. But it's people in their backyard on the other side of the trail, like 10 steps away in reality. I stare through the cracks of the leafless trees to see if the person following me is still there. No care whatsoever. I thought turning the lights off was just a trap, but legit, no one was there. Waited for what felt like 5 minutes, but what was probably 2. Got my energy back, sprinted the hell out of there as far as I could run without stopping. Got into this cross-section of walkways into the neighborhood and backwards. Out of the forest surroundings. Walk back onto the main street with gas stations and grocery store and whatnot. We made it. That actually rattled me the whole following week. Being in similar darkness or even seeing headlights at night. Already knew this extremely well, but it seriously reinforces how much we should look after women who are out at night, actively sticking with / protecting ones you know, or just giving non-threatening body language and space for the ones you don't. 'Cause I'm a 27-year-old dude, and I was losing my mind over that one. I've had many, so here's a kind of fun one. One day at my work, the management was putting on a barbecue at the back of the building. My workplace then was located on the outer edge of town, so there were other shops and things, but also bushes and parkland. This guy walked closely past us all in really unusual clothing for the modern era, especially for summer, a dark brown wool suit, hat, thick-rimmed glasses. He looked about 27. He looked like a journalist or businessman from the late 1950s or early 60s. He just looked so extremely different that I naturally assumed all my colleagues would have wondered what was up with him too. Eventually he walked down towards the park/fields and seemed to vanish out of view. I still just assumed he was a really unusual looking dude, so after the barbecue I asked what everyone thought was up with the unusually dressed guy who walked right near and past us, and everyone was like, "What guy?" Literally no one else saw him. He was close enough to our gathering that someone should have seen him. Sometimes after dark those of us who stayed on late would hear someone typing at an empty desk, while in another building our company occupied the cleaners said they hated doing the men's toilets as they'd feel a presence. At yet another office we moved to, a marketing manager claims to have been followed by invisible footsteps. I guess some people just want to work even if they're ghosts. Was at my mother's house, she was on the phone, and we were both standing in the kitchen. I was helping her finish baking some biscuits. She was chatting away on the phone, and I heard the sound of a dog's feet tapping on the kitchen floor. Just immediately thought, oh yeah, that's the dog coming to see if there's any crumbs. The dog had died about a year prior. Was the weirdest feeling, but I do feel like he was there watching us in the kitchen. I love that dog. When I was around 8 years old, my parents got me a closet, which was already pretty used. The doors of the closet wouldn't totally shut, leaving quite so. The space between the doors and the drawers was a bit wonky, but you know, it's just to store clothes. However, every night, I would stare at the closet, which was at the far end of my room. The spaces between the doors were just some very black voids, which would creep me out. I also started to have nightmares. I started to complain to my parents about it during the day, but later also at night. My older sister, who claimed to see some weird from time to time, was fed up with my whining, and one night when I was crying again because of how frightened I was, she walked into my room and opened the doors of the closet, saying this BS had to stop. This, I will always remember. Once my sister had opened the doors, she'd lose all the color in her face. She stood there in silence for like a second or 5, then closed the doors and told my parents this closet had to go. They listened, and the next day, the closet was removed from my room. I slept peacefully since then. When I asked my sister what she saw, she always deflected my question. Several years later, when I was around 18 years old, I was chilling at my sister's house, and we were reminiscing about the past. I asked again what she saw back then, and she went quiet for just a moment. I will never forget what she told me. My sister told me that when she had opened those doors, she saw a very thick black aura and something that looked like a little girl sitting there. It felt very wrong, and that was when she told my parents that closet had to go. I do believe in the paranormal, thanks to this experience. What my sister described is what I felt back then. It felt very wrong. Can't explain why this entity chose that closet to chill in. Was 7 years old. Fell down a ravine and broke my wrist. It was a bad fracture and the bone had to be settled. I was at my grandparents' village for the whole summer at that point, so my grandpa took me to the hospital at a nearby town. It was about 11 p.m. when they had me under and were operating on me. At that point my mother, about 400 kilometers away, woke up violently from her sleep with a feeling that something was terribly wrong. We got back to my grandparents' house on the first train next morning at 6 a.m. As we walked in, we saw my grandma on the phone with my mother, who had called in to check first thing in the morning. How did she know? I'm not superstitious, but I am a little station. This was when I was younger, in middle school. I stayed up a bit later. I think the time was about 10 p.m. to 11 p.m. I had my bedroom door open, cause got to let the cat in and out, and my lights were on, but the hallway and the rest of the houses were lights off. My parents were sleeping on the completely other side of the house. My bed was perpendicular to the door, and I was facing the headboard/wall, I think on a device playing games or reading, I don't remember. I hear this androgynous voice, very clearly coming from the hallway, say, "I think you should go to bed now." I locked my door and went to bed. Me, my sister, and my mom have all had things disappear and then later reappear in a strange place. And yes, we have ruled out that we are just forgetful people who forget where we put things. Most recent example for me, I harvested some beets from my garden this spring, put them in a plastic grocery bag to take to my sister's place for a dinner we were having the next day. Next day comes, they are nowhere to be found. I keep some of my clean laundry, socks and whatnot, in a storage tote since I don't have a dresser. Well, months later, I woke up and there were the beets perched on top of the laundry I had just done the day before. Still in their bag. As fresh as they were the day I picked them. It is in the upper 70s in my room, so there's no way they wouldn't have molded or rotted sealed up in a bag that way for months in there. One evening it was time to go home from work. I said goodbye to my coworker, turned off my PC and left. The next morning, I walk into the office and there's glass everywhere on the floor where I usually sit. I'm like, WTF, that's weird. I clean it up and proceed with my day. My coworker comes in and asks me if I cleaned up the glass. I said yes. Then he says, "Come with me, you need to see this on the security footage." He showed me yesterday's video from when I left. You see me leaving the door. My coworker is still sitting there. 10 minutes later he goes to the bathroom and leaves the office. There is a ceiling lamp above my head usually. For a few moments nothing happens. Then you see a few weird pixels move from the top to the middle of the screen where the light is. The camera switches to night vision and the light now suddenly glows brighter and brighter. Then it stops and for no reason falls right out of the socket and down onto the floor, shattering into a million pieces. The camera flicks back to normal mode. My coworker comes in to find the carnage. My ex and I were in DFW watching a parade in the old cow town. I saw a coffin on a stand in front of one of the old storefronts, which I thought was a weird thing to have out on display. I looked away and looked back and it was gone, but I realized the old store was an undertaker. I was ready to dismiss it as a trick of the light or my subconscious expectations when my ex said, "That's weird. I thought I saw a coffin outside that store." Not super unsettling, but one of the few, possibly, supernatural experiences I've had. The other was seeing a shadow move across the churchyard next door to my friend's house, but there was no one there. Not really unexplained, but has always stuck with me. Anyone who's grown up in the UK will know what Doffy is. It's basically an outdoor scheme for young people where you hike and camp and climb mountains in Wales, and you can put it on your CV once you're done. Anyways, I was with my group, and we were taking a break while we figured out where exactly we were. We were a bit lost, and I sat down on the side of this dirt trail just to gather my bearings a bit. My friends are all standing in front of me talking when suddenly we hear a bird slam into the tree behind me, on the other side of the path. Before I even know what's happened, my friends turn towards me to see what the sound was, and I remember suddenly just seeing complete urgency in my friend's face. He grabbed me and pulled me forward towards him, and I fell forwards into the bushes they were next to, and just as I was about to be like, WTF man, I was sitting there, a car comes speeding down this tiny path and zooms past us. If my friends hadn't looked towards the noise of the bird hitting the tree, the car would have hit my head as I was leaning slightly backwards. I would have died on the spot, no doubt, at the speed the guy was going. We found the bird afterwards as well, it had died. Really weird all around. Driving with a friend of mine back to his house and taking the back way. It's all twists and turns through wooded countryside. As we were coming up toward a 90-degree bend, my friend had to slam on the brakes, as there was a woman in a purple shirt and jeans, kneeling on the double yellow line, facing down. Her hair was long and dangled low, think the Ring Girl. We sat there for what felt like a minute, but was probably more like 3 seconds, and my friend put the pedal to the metal, swerved around her, and we got the hell out of Dodge and never looked back. One night my roommate and I were smoking outside together, and I got a very overwhelming feeling that something was about to end. I told her, and we left it at that. Later in the evening we colored together. I had the same overwhelming feeling that something was about to end, but it was really strong this time. I told her again. When we were done coloring, she showed me the drawing she made. It was essentially a stairway to the afterlife with angels and contrast between night and day. She said she had not felt very inspired lately, but tonight she was. The next day we found out that our best friend had committed suicide the night before at the time we were coloring. Some people can recall the earliest memories of their life. I remember the last 4 lifetimes of mine. They were all moments before death. One of them was memories of being an animal. I remember being born into this lifetime. I remember my mother changing my diaper. I remember being in a vehicle on the way to the grocery store when my consciousness became consistent. I only dream about bits of my future, none of which I can control. I don't know what it's like to dream real/random dreams. I had a near-death experience, and it was the most comforting feeling. Not feeling your body, not feeling yourself breathing, not feeling pain. It was a familiar feeling, the same feeling I felt when I transitioned into different lives. I don't talk to anyone about this because I don't want to sound crazy. I don't fear death, but I can't accept it yet because I have a kid now. I'm just enjoying life for what it is until I decide my kid will survive without me. On Halloween night, me and my 3 siblings were watching a horror movie and me and my brother decided to snag our sister's pails and run as a joke. We got out the door and ducked behind a blueberry bush and watched them come out after us, then a mystery child ran out and into the woods. We all saw it. We all heard it. Just the silhouette of a kid darting off into the dark. When I was very young, 5 or younger, I would sleep with my bedroom door open. I liked having the light from the hall come in. The head of my bed was against the same wall that my door was in, and my dresser was between my bed and door against the same wall. The dresser would block the light from hitting me and keeping me awake, but at least I could see my room. I hated going to bed when I was young, like most kids. I always had trouble falling asleep, though. Until I was a teenager, I thought it was pretty much normal to lay in bed for 45 minutes to an hour before falling asleep. I would think about some weird stuff during that time. Like, for instance, coming up from somewhere with the idea that my family were aliens. I was always scared of aliens growing up. And I have this one memory that I think all this other stuff, my fear of aliens and thinking my family are secretly aliens, is built around. See, one night I went to bed and, as usual, I wasn't tired at all. I lay there on my back thinking about how long it's going to be just doing nothing and being bored until sleep finally comes. My eyes itched, so I raised my hands and rubbed them with the sides of my knuckles. This wasn't tiredness, it was just itching like from allergies. I rubbed my eyes for maybe a few seconds, then opened them and let them readjust to the dim light in my room. Something is wrong with that light, though. It's too dim. Without sitting up or more than just turning my head, I looked past my dresser towards the door. It's been nearly 40 years since this happened and I can still remember exactly what it looked like, and I still have no idea what it was. The best I can say is that it was a head, the top of a very strange head. It looked like it had some kind of skin, but the skin was almost totally white, no pigment at all. And it was wrinkly, like something out of Star Trek's makeup studio. I couldn't see anything else, but whatever this head was attached to was standing right in my doorway blocking the light. My tiny paranoid brain, of course, immediately shouted alien, silently to myself. I closed my eyes and stayed perfectly still, thinking if maybe I didn't move it wouldn't notice me and would just leave. In what felt like a few more seconds, it was morning. I must have fallen asleep like that because I just woke up like nothing had happened. Oddly, I was still laying on my back, when all my life I usually woke up on my side. I've had other weird experiences, but that is the one that has always scared me the most. When I was 10 years old, my parents used to leave home alone and told me there were 3 things I could never do: 1 leave the house, 2 use the stove, and 3 never answer the door. But being dumb I broke the third one. You see, I was home alone playing Xbox on the couch and then I heard a knock on the door and saw a tall man there dropping something off. I assumed it was an Amazon package, but I opened the door and grabbed it, and when I went to close the door I saw the man staring. I just wrote it off as maybe he's just seeing what it was, but later around 7 p.m., already dark, and before my parents were home, I see through my window the screen door open on our porch and thought my parents were home early, but I soon realized it was not my mother and father, it was the man from before, and he was standing there. But then he says something that will haunt till the day I die: "I know you're home." I instantly froze, and he soon started peeking through the windows trying to see me, but at that point I was hiding under my bed, and then, by the grace of God, my father, a 6 feet 7 inches German ex-Marine, came home to see this man on the porch saying, "I know you're home," and trying to look through the windows. He then proceeded to ask what he was doing, and he said, "I wanted to play with your boy in there." My father then called the police. About 2 days later I learned the man was an escaped convict and murdered his previous neighbor's children. I was lucky that day, and Annie obviously much wiser. When I was in basic training for the army, we stayed in some pretty outdated barracks. Throughout our training, people started noticing weird things within the second week. We had lights in our latrine that had a motion sensor, so whenever you would walk in the lights would cut on and turn off after about 10 minutes or so. During fire guard, for those that don't know, it's basically where a few people will stay awake during select hours throughout the night to clean and tend to basic administrative actions, such as picking up a phone, etc. Some people would go in the bathroom to clean and then wait the rest of their shift in front of the sinks chatting and whatnot, but the lights would randomly cut on without anyone entering or triggering it. Then as days went by, we had this guy, let's call him Jack. Jack was presumably a son of a medium. I end up going to bed as soon as I can, and I wake up about an hour after and get up to use the latrine. I come back to my bunk, and I notice him sitting straight up looking at a locker and talking and laughing at absolutely nothing. I shrug it off as this dude is weird/b at tsh1t crazy. I notice him talking and laughing randomly as days go by and I confront him. He asked me if I believed in ghosts and spirits. I replied yes, and he informed me of his connection to the afterlife. He told me that he had been talking to this spirit and how she was lonely, and gave him a list of rules on what to do and not do throughout basic training. I was kind of just thinking whatever you're besting, until he told me that she said that these were her barracks and that she died from a freak accident there. He even described what she was wearing, and I later looked it up when we could get our phones, and it was an old Army Point uniform. Jack then told me that she is friendly but likes to play games with us as it's fun for her. Meanwhile I'm sketched out, and then word starts spreading that we have a ghost in our barracks. So, for the next few weeks most of us are paranoid as hell while doing fire guard. One morning we go and toe the line. Everyone lines up around the middle of the floor waiting for the drill sergeants to come in and inspect our bay for general cleaning of everything, and after 2 minutes we hear loud crashing and banging coming from inside the latrine around the corner of where our janitor's closet was located. Everyone instantly turns pale, freaking out and paranoid about Jack's spirit friend. Eventually no one wants to step foot inside, so I go in to inspect and make sure everything is in order before our drill sergeant sees and smokes us for it, so my platoon guide follows in after me. Upon entering I see that almost every item from the janitor's closet was thrown into the bathroom stall across from it: mops, brooms, jugs of chemicals, brushes, you name it. I figured that there was no way everything just happened to fall 5 feet into that stall, as everything is in a designated spot, straight, and orderly. I walked back out with my platoon guide, and we didn't say a word, but everyone could see the looks on our faces. Later on, no one wanted to go into the latrine. That night, I went to ask Jack if that was his friend's doing, and he just said, she thought it was the funniest thing ever. Later, throughout the end of our training everything was seemingly normal. I asked Jack if he still talks to his friend, and he said that she hasn't been coming around as much and got bored of us. Askreddit. Towards the end of our training our drill sergeant informed us that our barracks used to be female-only barracks. So the house I grew up in has 2 sets of stairs, one that takes you to the bedrooms and the other one on the other side of the house. That one takes you to the laundry room. A lot of times I woke up in the middle of the night getting someone walking down the laundry room. I'd count the 17 steps I would hear them walk through the house and stop at the stairs. I did hear them going 6 steps once, but never more. My brother's room, however, was downstairs. He says he did hear them go all the way to the hallway upstairs a lot of times. I was like 13 or 15, me and my 2 brother gotten back from school, and we went to get back inside our home. My older brother was first to get inside. First thing you know is that our house is small, and it has a short hallway that leads to the kitchen/living room, and on the end are 2 doors. One, the first that anyone would see at the end of the hallway, is my older brother's room, and another door near theirs leading to the bathroom. My older brother said that he saw a hand with red sleeves closing the door to the bathroom. He thought it was our older brother, but when he checked the bathroom, there was no one. The only ways out were the door, which he blocked, or the small window near the shower that only a child can fit through, which was broken and unable to open. Also no, the glass wasn't broken, so it was impossible that whoever it was had used it to enter or escape through. And to top it all off, nobody was home, just the 3 of us. I minored in film in college, and part of the minor was creating a student film. I am a huge horror fan, so me and some other film students wrote a script for a found footage horror film about a supposedly real ghost that had been seen before at our college, since it gave us an excuse to do all the filming on campus. Our first day of filming, we got through a bunch of random scenes with no issues, so we got our ghost actress into her costume and makeup and started to film her scenes. The first time we filmed the scene, we played it back and all of the audio, which had been fine before then, was corrupted and completely unintelligible. We started to film the scene again, and suddenly the lamp above the actress lost power and would only flicker the rest of the night. For the duration of filming, we had constant issues with the cameras and power, but only when we shot scenes related to the ghost. All sorts of other weird stuff happened, like chairs breaking under actors, props we were using suddenly disappearing, and we kept having horrible chills in certain rooms, to the point that we had to add a jacket to the main character's costume, just to avoid shivering on camera. The entire rest of the crew witnessed everything, and it exclusively happened when we mentioned or showed the ghost in the scene. Even our non-superstitious crew members were freaked out by the end of filming. Not necessarily creepy, but I had a friend who I had a really deep connection with. 5 years ago, I had just seen him, and we went on our separate ways. As I was walking away, I thought, he's such a wonderful human. It's a shame he's going to die in 5 years. I stopped dead in my tracks after I thought that. What the hell, why would I think that? It almost didn't even feel like my own thought. It was like I had someone whisper this in my ear, like I heard it, but no one did. Just an intrusive thought though, right? Well, earlier last year I had that thought again. I was sitting in my car eating lunch when it happened, and we were texting. He is going to die in 6 months. I shook it off again, just anxiety. He died in a car accident 5 years and 2 days after I had that first horrible thought. It was 6 months after the second thought of his death. I can't explain it, but I just knew. I'm glad in a way because I left nothing unsaid. But I do miss him terribly, and I'll never brush off a thought like that again. In high school, around 2008 or 9, I was hanging out by my friend's pool. He ran inside for something, and I was by myself for about 30 minutes smoking black and mild. His younger brother was a toddler and had a toy lawn mower that also played music. The toy was about 2 meters away from me. I started to hear the strangest noise I've ever heard. It sounded like a mix between a cicada and the noise pose made from Zelda, Ocarina of Time. The noise got closer and closer to me and suddenly stopped when it was a few meters from me. As soon as the noise stopped, that toy lawnmower started to randomly play music. I've seen/heard a lot of strange things growing up in rural Oklahoma, but that one still gives me chills. One time I was riding my bike home from school. I live around 30 minutes away from my school, and as I'm riding down a hill a small black car speeds past me, and as it crosses me a dog in the back window barks twice. Then 5 minutes later the same car passes me again and the dog barks twice again. So, I thought to myself the only thing that could have happened is if they sped past me pull over and wait for me to pass then repeat. But that still doesn't explain the dog. Then 10 minutes later after I've turned 2 corners the same car passes me again with the dog parking twice. So now I have no idea how it could have passed me again because it turned multiple times and there is no way they could have known where I was going. So that just continued to creep me out for the rest of the bike ride. Some of my friends and I went to Tucson, Arizona. We were there because one of my friends wanted to see his old college friends. We got a room downtown and decided to go out for some drinks. I ended up meeting up with some other guys that invited me back to their college apartment near campus. My friends went back to the hotel while I tagged along with my new friends. The new friends and I had a great time talking, but it was getting late, so I decided to head back to the hotel. Of course, my phone died so I couldn't get a hold of a cab or an Uber. However, I could see the hotel from where I was standing. I decided to make the walk back to the hotel at 3 a.m. As I was walking back I was enjoying the night. All of a sudden a black cat crossed my path. Once I looked back on the path I was walking I swear I saw a tree turn and look in my direction then went back to stillness. The figure of the tree looked like that of a woman. Within a blink of an eye, I started to see things moving. I felt like I was being watched. Every house I passed felt like someone was watching me. The trees were moving tilting toward my direction. The streets I walked past looked like shadows walking around. It felt like I was in Halloween Town from Nightmare Before Christmas. The freakiest part was passing a dried-up riverbed and it looked like bodies were lying in every direction. It was the most supernatural experience that I ever had. When I got back to the hotel I told my friends what had just happened to me. Of course, they teased me saying I must have smoked or ate something that was laced. After the jokes, my friend who went to college in Tucson told me that the city was known to have a lot of deaths due to it being an outlaw town. He was taken back by my story but wasn't surprised. 4 stories. Oldest to most recent. The missus and I moved into our first house together. 2 months later we began hearing voices. We moved house, and it followed us and ramped up the activities, from talking, knocks up to an apparition running down the hallway. We moved into our current home, and it's stuck with us still. I experienced a lot of activities one night. Walking up and down the hallway, opening and closing the toilet seat, then it stopped that night when it touched my hand. The misses were rolled over on the other side of the bed and the kids couldn't exit their rooms because of the door handles being out of their reach. NOV last year, while packing to visit parents, had a candle thrown at me from the bookshelf that was in front of me. We still experience the odd voice or knock, but it's never hurt us or the kids, so we're not worried about it at this point. My dog barked every night. He was let outside and wouldn't shut up. So, I ran out to bring him in and saw someone running in our yard. They hopped on their snowmobile and left. When the light of the snowmobile came on I saw that they were wearing all black, helmet and gloves included. Never found anything else out. I would have been more creeped out, but I've been affected by these situations so many times in my life. I'm the last of 11 children, so there are lots of stories between us all. I was born in Indiana, but when I was 4, we moved to the state of Arkansas. Years later, I was visiting my older sister and the conversation turned to the old house we lived in, and she asked me, "You were so young when we moved away from that house, do you have any real memories of it?" I explained to her that I had a few fleeting memories, but the only one that really stuck out is one day I was walking to the bathroom from the living room. In order to do this, you had to enter the kitchen and then take a left turn. In our kitchen the sink was below a large window and on the other side of that large window was a pitch of angled roof about 2 feet wide that was above the stairs that went down to our cellar. When we were young we used to play a game we called Dairy Queen. We would sit on this pitch of roof while our mother handed us drinks through the window like a drive-through. Anyway, I explained to her that on the day in question, I was walking to the bathroom, and I noticed something outside of the corner of my eye. I looked over and saw a young girl sitting on the pitch of roof outside the window looking in the window. I told her that I remembered this because it was so unusual, and I did not recognize the girl. I explained to her that she, to the best of my recollection, looked to be about 10 or 11 years old, had short red hair, and thick plastic-framed glasses. I have no memory of what I did. I don't know if I went to get my mother or just ignored it. Again, I was 4 years old. As I was telling the story, I was absent-mindedly fiddling with my phone, and when I looked up, my older sister had tears in her eyes and was visibly shaken and ghostly white. Through her tears, she told me that when she was about 7 years old, that he was in the kitchen with a lot of our other siblings getting a drink and looked up in that window and saw a little girl that she described as about 10 or 11 years old, short red hair, with large plastic-framed glasses. This would have been about 2 years before I was even born, and about 6 years before I saw this girl. A few days later, another one of my sisters who was in between us in age, came over to visit as well. As my older sister was telling the younger sister about this, she also started crying. She said she saw the exact same girl about 2 or 3 years after my older sister had seen her and a few years before I saw her. My mother, who was the ultimate skeptic and believed in nothing even remotely supernatural, told us through her eye rolls that the lady we bought the house from had a young granddaughter who passed away when she was young. She didn't remember much about the girl, but she did tell us that the preacher who was in charge of the church that we attended when we lived there was still the preacher and had been the preacher for many years before we had gone there. When my younger sister got back home, she went to the church and told a little white lie to the preacher that she was doing some research on the old house and that our mother had told her about the lady we bought the house from and the unfortunate passing of her granddaughter. The preacher said, "Oh yes, that was most unfortunate. She was such a sweet little girl, and we loved having her here." My sister said, "My mom didn't remember much about her. Do you remember what she looked like?" I'm sure you can see exactly where this is going, but the preacher said, "Oh yes, she was adorable. She had the cutest red hair, and the poor girl didn't see well because she had Down syndrome, so she had really thick black plastic-framed glasses." He must not have noticed the panic on my sister's face, because he then told my sister, "In fact, her headstone is in the cemetery behind the church if you'd like to go see it." My sister in fact did not want to go see it and immediately excused herself and got the hell out of there. So yeah, while I roll my eyes at 99% of ghost stories, I am absolutely certain that I've seen one. Saw a little girl ghost who apparently loved my house. I definitely believe in ghosts, but the creepiest experiences I have ever had was in my wife's old apartment, back when we were dating. It is a single-family residence in the Boston area, and probably about 100 years old, maybe a little older. It's hard to explain, but over the 18 months she lived there, I became convinced that there was a spirit in the home who did not like men, and there was especially negative energy in my wife's bedroom on the first floor, and in the basement. I'm not a psychic, so here's what I mean. 1. Every time a man was in the house, myself or her roommate's boyfriends/friends, it felt like someone was watching you. It got to the point we couldn't have a nice time, because again, hard to explain, but every nerve in my body was screaming someone was in the room watching me. 2. Every time a man slept over, we would go to sleep, if I could at all, and in the morning, every single drawer and cabinet in the kitchen would be wide open. I'm talking 20 to 30 drawers and cabinets. My wife was like, "Oh, the cat must have knocked them open," repeatedly. In places above the sink? And pulled out the drawers? 3. Speaking of the cat, it was a super friendly, playful cat, loved chasing lasers and being pet. On many occasions, the room would suddenly get stuffy and muted, and during these times, the cat would often freeze, stop what it was doing, stare at a random point in the room, and hiss. The cat would also never go into my wife's room, ever. For, the basement was creepy, and as a grown man, I was sketched out when doing laundry. I always felt like I was being watched, and while nothing ever happened, again, the feeling I had when down there was pure fear like I have never felt. 5. Things came to a head one night, when I wasn't there. My wife's roommate, their bedrooms were up on a half floor, was sick, so she slept on the couch in the living room. Her boyfriend stayed upstairs in the bedroom. In the middle of the night, he woke up screaming bloody murder. Apparently, he snapped awake in a sweat, and there was a girl standing in the corner with her face to the wall. He called out his girlfriend's name because he thought it was her, and the girl turned around and it clearly wasn't her because, in this guy's words, she had markings like claw marks all over her face, and her mouth opened, and she just screamed at me, so I screamed. That was enough for me to never spend the night there again. My wife is a skeptic and sort of laughs it off, but it has never happened in any place we have lived in since. And her roommates from that time definitely believed something was up. When I was about 11 years old, my brother, 9 years old, and I were sleeping on the trampoline outside by our back pasture. This is something we did often, during the summer, but that night was different. He and I both woke up at the same random time during the night and decided to go inside to get more blankets. On our way back outside to get back onto the trampoline, we noticed that the south-facing fence to the pasture was significantly further away than it was before. Not like the fence had moved, but the entire pasture had just moved half a mile away from where it had always been. We walked towards it thinking it was just some trick the lighting was playing on our eyes, but as we moved closer, we found ourselves standing in what would be the middle of the pasture. Except the pasture was still a good quarter mile away from us. We both got very weirded out, so we went back inside and decided not to sleep on the trampoline that night. The next morning the pasture was back to how it had always been, as if nothing had happened. He and I still talk about today, and we both remember it vividly. When I was 5 years old, my mom left me in the car running in our driveway that was on a hill. I was playing with my Mighty Mouse puzzles. Can tell how old I am. When she left, I jumped behind the driving wheel and put the car in reverse. The car started going backwards fast. I remember hearing a female voice, clear to this day, saying jump. I pushed the driver's side door open and jumped out. The car door from the movement swung back and cut the back of my skull open, 180 sticks. I could overhear the rescue personnel, who were looking at the car, which had hit a tree and flattened, say that I would have been dead if I stayed in the car. The engine was in the front seat. Now I know it's crazy for a 5-year-old to remember such details, but this happened, can't explain it, no one was around. After my screams and the car crash, my mom came running out of the house. When I was 9 to 10, my older sister and neighbor, both 11 to 12, and I decided to camp in my backyard. Had a tent and sleeping bags and snacks and all that. Around 8 to 8:30 it was getting dark, but we could still see outside and had the tent open still. I heard some noise in the woods and thought maybe it was one of the stray cats, so I looked around and there was some random dude, clothes covered in blood, carrying a sack that also had blood, walking straight toward my yard. When he reached the spot that our grass turns into woods, he just was gone. I checked to see if my sister and neighbor also saw this guy, and yep, they did. We freaked out and decided not to camp out that night. We did tell our parents, but they said he was probably a hunter coming back from wherever. I do believe that if he hadn't literally disappeared in front of us. I don't talk to my neighbor now, but my sister does still remember the same details solo, no idea what that was about. Unrelated really, but I recently went into these woods to hopefully scavenge for animal bones and found a rusted up tricycle that looked like it was from the Saw movies, some symbols carved into the trees, and ended up getting completely lost and came out of the woods in a whole other part of town despite following my fence line completely. Did not find any bones, unfortunately. I am not someone who's spiritual or religious or who believes in any of that supernatural stuff. I do believe that anything is possible, though. Like, how do I know what the truth is? That being said, one rental I once lived in was consistently creepy. Downstairs was open plan with a kitchen/living room area towards one side of the house, and a bathroom/laundry on the opposite end. The bedrooms were downstairs along a wall leading from the kitchen to the bathroom/laundry area. There was one staircase that led to the second floor that was entirely an ensuite, and the bottom of the staircase was right near the bathroom/laundry side of the house. I lived here while I was a teen with my brother, little sis, and my mother and her partner. As a teen, I would often be up very late. I still am a night owl to this day. On this particular night, it was a school/work night, meaning the adults and my little sis had work/school the next day, so they were all sleeping. My mom and her partner slept upstairs in the ensuite, and the nightly routine was that once mom and partner retired to their room, they would never come back down until the morning. They had everything they needed up there, including a bathroom, a TV, drinks. They had no reason to come back down once they went up. My little sis also often slept through the night soundly and was small at this point in time. That will be useful info later. My brother and I are both gamers. I could hear him mashing away at his controller and swearing at people on the other side of the world while I peacefully played Mass Effects and spoke to cool fictional aliens. While I was in the middle of a cutscene, I needed to go to the bathroom, but decided to not interrupt the moment and continued until I completed it, but it tore my attention away enough that I took note of the sound of someone rustling/rumbling around in the kitchen. It sounded like pots and pans and cutlery being sifted through. I assumed it was my brother until I heard him yell at the game yet again. I then got up to go to the bathroom, and upon exiting my room, I immediately saw my brother through the crack of the door to his room, and then looked right towards the kitchen. Cabinets and drawers were left open all over the place. The strangest part was that there were cupboards opened that had nothing in them, and not because someone stole what was in there, but because we never filled them with stuff. So why would any one of us open them? We had only recently moved to this place, and never put anything in certain cupboards, but we were there long enough that everyone knew which cupboards were full and which were empty. So, I don't know why any one of us would bother opening them. I went through the kitchen closing every cupboard, including the pantry. Then I went to the toilet, checking on my sister as I walked past her room, and sure enough, she was fast asleep. Now the toilet was directly across from the kitchen, meaning you can see the toilet door from the kitchen, and can immediately see straight towards the kitchen from the toilet door when you exit. I remember being spooked, but try to rationalize it. It wasn't my brother, I saw him gaming. It wasn't my sister, she was asleep and cupboards were too high for her to reach into. I figured maybe it was mom or her partner, even though it's out of routine for them to come down after they've retired to their room for the night. While I was in the toilet room, I remembered just trying to make light of the situation. I chuckled to myself while I finished up and thought to myself, imagine if all the cupboards were open again, Hannah. I opened that toilet door. I looked straight towards that kitchen. All the cupboards, the exact same ones I had just closed not even 5 minutes ago, were all opened again. I immediately rushed from the toilet into the bathroom and locked the door. Now I thought there was an intruder. There was no way it was my brother, no way it was my sister, and no way it was my mom or her partner because the stairs were right next to the toilet and were creaky aft. I would have heard them going up and down if it was them. But I didn't. I tried texting and calling my brother, but as he was playing games, he wasn't hearing his phone. So, I built up the courage and rushed from the bathroom directly to his room. I told him what happened and that I was worried someone was in the house. And our stupid ego-boosted teenage minds thought we could take me on. We grabbed cricket bats and walked the whole house and opened every closet and every door, making sure it was clear. We didn't find anyone. So I would like to say it was the Wiking or a family member, but all windows were closed and locked, and I know none of my family members left their rooms. Upon asking my mom and her partner the next morning, they said they never left their room. We never come back down once we come up here. My ill sis slept through the night, and I could hear my brother gaming the entire time. The last detail is how cupboards that we all knew we didn't store anything in were open. Which one of us would open any of those cupboards knowing that nothing was in them? The only logical explanation is someone else was in the house. Or you could say it was a ghost. But the plausibility of that is, that's one of the only things that's happened to me that's straight out of a horror flick that I can't explain away at all. One of the freakiest moments for me. TLDR, one night I came out of my room to find the kitchen. It looked like someone had been searching through it. Cabinets were opened everywhere, even cabinets that we never stored stuff in. I closed all the cupboards, went to the toilet, and while I was finishing up, joked to myself, what if all the cupboards were open again, Ashana? Upon opening the toilet door, all of the exact same cupboards were open again. Weren't my family members, as I heard my brother gaming in his room the entire time. I checked and saw my little sister sleeping on my way to the toilet after closing the cupboards, and my parents would never come out of their room, and confirmed it when I asked them the next day, after they retire to their room for the night. It's going to be kind of hard to tell. But I'll give her a shot. One of my many experiences BTW. So, one night about 2 years ago, my best buddy and I were just hanging out and cruising around in his 2006 Nissan Sentra SR spec. Yes, it's a flex, but also is important to the story later. We're hanging out at our regular spot listening to music when he gets a call from a mutual friend of ours. She was supposed to be going on a camping trip with her fam but had to work that night and offers my buddy money to drive her out to the spot. It was like an hour-and-a-half drive from where we were. Because we had nothing to do with the road trip. Good to mention that it's already around 10:30 to 11 p.m., so we go pick her up. I moved to the back seat and let her take the front. And we started our ride. Now before this my buddy was a skeptic but didn't pay much mind to anything of the spiritual or extraterrestrial side of things, so to speak. Anyway, 5 minutes into the drive. Just as we are getting onto the highway, the girl up front points out an owl perched up on the highway sign. She starts going into details about how in that situation an owl can be a sign of a bad omen or a death within 3 days, so on so forth. My buddy brushed it off. And I am a believer in everything and nothing at the same time. Acted as my friend did, but truly pondered the actual significance of this creature. So, she told us that we were going to this specific campground at a provincial park. Central Ontario/Muskokas, which is also important to anyone that knows the lore of the area. She didn't know exactly where it was, but I figured it's a provincial campground. I'll just search it up on Apple Maps and it will get us there. Oh, how I was wrong. We drive for about an hour 15. And we're passing through this small town that we were all familiar with as a kind of sketchy place in some respects. But we were all comfortable. The map started leading us down this road. Just out of the town. The road started getting rougher. No more streetlights. We're heading into the true Ontario boons. I'm from the country, so this doesn't bother me too much. But I'm definitely slightly uncomfortable just because I don't know the specific area well. It's also good to mention that the legal name of this road all the way down is Chemical Road and later turned into, but we didn't know, Chemical Trail. The further down this road we go, the more secluded we get. The last thing we passed was a kind of campground/boat launch into this sketchy little lake. No exaggeration, off the lake into the parking lot of this boat launch was this ominous, creepy, dense fog only visible by the almost full moon and the dim headlights. After we passed that boat launch, it was just a bumpy, horrid dirt road. No more power lines. No cottages. No cars. No anything. No signs of life at all whatsoever. The girl up front starts getting nervous, but my buddy and I assure her that everything's fine. By this point, there is no cell reception. No radio signals. And my phone, you guessed it, had died. So, I plugged it into the car hoping that our map course saved. The road started getting bad. As in, completely unmaintained, serious ruts do not tire tracks. It's all overgrown. It was basically a really rough trail that hadn't been used in a long time. That we were driving down in a front-wheel drive sports car. My buddy kept saying if we don't see anything in 5 minutes we're turning around. He didn't like how rough the lack of road was on his car. Understandably so. But there was this energy. This toxic curiosity. Something that just kept drawing us further down that road. Our destiny was very obviously nowhere near, but we just couldn't turn around. Finally, after a long ominous silence, only filled by sharp deal breaths, comes the words from my mouth. What is that? Again, to put it in perspective for you. We are now at least an hour and a bit completely away from any sort of civilization. And just off the path, almost completely rotted and covered by bush, was an old camper trailer. Something straight out of a creepy movie. Boarded up windows, door nailed shut. Rusted out bottom completely overgrown. And the lady up front and I both at the same time uttered. Beta vibes. We were both feeling this horrifying energy coming from that trailer. We could have turned around and just left. We could have stopped there and ended that journey. But we kept on saying, if we don't see anything in 5 minutes we leave. So, we just kept journeying on. About 10 minutes past that trailer now. The car starts to kind of sputter, and it stalls. Not blaming it on the paranormal. It was probably just we were putting down this goat path in a car that's not meant to do so. But it stalls. As the car shuts off. Lights go out. And for some reason he doesn't try to start it right away. We're all just sitting in the dark. Listening to each other's painful breaths. When we all just freeze. Something had caught our attention, but we didn't know what. We could tell if it was a sound. Or something we saw. Or what. It was just this bad vibe. But we all held our breath. When this faint rustling in the bushes around us pricked our ears, and then bang, something had just hit our car. Like a rock being thrown at the door. Buddy starts the car up. But instinctively drives forward instead of trying to turn back around. But the further we went, the crazier things got. There's almost no way this is possible. But all three of us swore at the same time. We heard this collaboration of faint muddled voices. And the distinctive sound of metal on metal. Not like something on the car was broken. More like someone is posing metal on an anvil. So, he picks up the speed when we finally come to a fork in the road. He looks back at me, not acknowledging our very obviously panicked lady friend in the front seat. And just says, "No matter what happens, right? Right? Ride or die," that was our saying. We were kind to everyone at that point in our lives. So essentially that was just him making sure that no matter what's about to happen, that I would back him up and not go down without a fight. So, uselessly I might add, I was clutching now the buck knife I had strapped to my belt, ready for something to attack while we were slowly trying to turn around. In a very narrow area. The noises kept getting louder. Things kept on hitting our car, but nothing showed its face. We finally got turned around and he slammed it into gear, kicking up dust as the tires tried to catch traction. Going faster than we were before, but not as fast as we would have liked given the state of the trail. We start hightailing it out. The noises persist and we descend further into manic survival mode. But oh yeah. Remember that trailer I was talking about? Now coming back, through the gaps in the boarded up windows. Was this faint but prominent amber glow. Almost red, in fact less of an amber but not quite red. We all noticed it. We all started freaking out. Picking up the pace as the trail starts to get a little better. But still these noises and this feeling of being followed. He finally hit an open road and with no hesitation we were in 6th gear doing 210 km/h. We dropped our now slightly calmer friend back off at her house. Hours down the line and went and sat so just he and I could discuss what had happened. We were so confused. The funny thing is that during all of this we were all telling stories and recalling very vivid dreams of places that reminded us of this place that we were in. You'd think it ends there, but oh no. No. There is much more. Over the next few months, he and I would encounter many things that we couldn't explain. Many up close and personal experiences that were terrifying. And to point out. Every single time, whether by myself or with him or someone else. Just before something bad happened. There would be an owl perched somewhere in my line of sight just moments before I ventured into another experience. I started taking the owls as my warning sign. As if there were some connect between them and me and whatever was going on. But I got stupid. I started purposely following these warnings. Getting more curious about what is happening. Over the months as well. Just in general conversation, my buddy and I both expressed this deep feeling of needing to go back to that place. Something was sewing us there and we couldn't shake it. Something was trying to lead us back. But we wouldn't go. When one cold winter night months down the line. In my car this time. More suitable for those conditions, being an all-wheel drive sport SUV with good tires, we impulsively decided to go back. This time with a different female friend. Leading up to this point, all three of our lives had been really scared and we were surrounded by this toxic impulsive energy. We gave into intrusive thoughts. And that night, we decided to just do it. We wanted to be reckless, but we wanted to face whatever was down that trail. So, we went. Without a map or anything, remembering exactly where we needed to go. This time was worse. This time was far more active. This time changed us all forever. But that's another story. You'll call it fake. Or you'll call me crazy. Whatever, man, I don't care. I've got 3 people that can back me up on this. This changed our lives forever. If you want to know more and know the rest of the story, let me know. I'm happy to share. A light. So, the funny thing is, it's actually a year ago today that this part of the story happened. So, I'm looking forward to seeing some activity tonight. Anyway, was in my car. At our regular, me my ride or die bro who drove in the first part and my friend G, were restless. There's this wave of toxic reckless energy around us. We want to do something stupid, something crazy. My buddy and I looked at each other at the exact same time. It was almost scary. So, we asked G if she wanted to go. She said yeah. I put my car and drove and absolutely bombed down the road. I mean, we're doing 160 in an 80. Anyway, it was almost a brain fog. I don't remember much of the drive over. It was kind of like I just blanked out and knew where to go. But I remember just before we reached outside of that little town right before the chemical road, there was a gas station we stopped at. I decided to fill the tank with some high test, then put an octane booster in just in case, I look up as I'm filling up and sitting on the roof of a building across the road, also on a telephone pole about 50 feet to the left and on top of the chemical road sign. We're 3 snow owls. I knew exactly what this meant for me but chose not to say anything. I didn't say a word until we started down the road. And the only reason I did is because every other sign or telephone pole sat another owl and the few from behind followed. They both noticed. My buddy, knowing of the significance, and also G knowing the same thing, became unsettled. Especially after we passed that boat launch, because after we passed they stopped appearing and following. They just stayed behind. Almost as if there was this barrier of evil they couldn't cross. Out of words, we'll continue the story on the next line. So again, no lights, no people, no houses or driveways. We're in the same secluded place. Except it's February in central Ontario. It was pretty snowy on the way down, but as soon as we got down the chemical road the weather stopped. And just left this heavy 2-foot blanket of snow on the ground. The problem is, we couldn't find the entrance to the trail anymore. Now blame this on low visibility due to snowbanks or it being pitch black, but we came to a quite literal dead end at the edge of a forest, and we hadn't found the road, so we turned around and started driving back. Lo and behold, the trail laid directly to our right about 5 minutes down. No tire tracks, but surprisingly clearer than the road we were down now. Now it's time to preface. This was a very low point in mine and my friend's life, and we came back ready to face whatever was out there. And I mean ready. Armed to the teeth. I won't say much more on that just so I don't completely criminalize myself. But there was a multitude of both redneck contraptions and factory-made government-approved-ish machinery. We continued down the trail to the place where the trailer was and stopped. The trailer was completely covered in snow. We sat for a second to hype ourselves up. Told G to stay in the car. Grabbed some tools and got out of the car. We were not dressed for the occasion, so we got about halfway to the trailer and couldn't go much further. We were knee-deep in snow. So, the first thing I do is, bro, you want to see something cool? Pull out comically large firework from my inner jacket pocket, aims at trailer and lights. Now again it's fresh snow all around the trailer, all on the road. Nothing has been there. The firework thing blasts out of my hand, blows a hole through the snow into the trailer and makes a pretty hearty explosion, and temporarily blinds us. When we regained our vision, about 5 feet away from us were all kinds of animal footprints. Most of them resemble that of a fox. But some were distinctly birds and other small creatures. Again, they were not there before. Hun and I stand in awe at everything that is transpiring when all of the sudden in the bushes all around crashing sounds and heavy breathing. We book it back to the car as quickly as possible, tools in hand, letting out a few shots here and there. Hop back in the car and I slam it into drive and start bombing it down the trail. My buddy kept looking in the mirror and was claiming that in between our tire tracks there were the little footprints spearing again, but he couldn't quite tell if that's actually what it was or not. I was trying to get back to the place that we turned around the last time we were there because there really wasn't anywhere else to turn around at all. And again, those same noises started. Banging metal, chattering voices. But now there are visible tracks in the snow and blurs of animals crashing around the bushes beside the trail. We finally approached the place we turned around last time. But my car was snuffed out. Except I started it up right away instead of waiting. But what I ended up doing was much more idiotic. I started the car. Turned on Death Touch by Paleface and blasted it, then hopped out of my car. All of these overwhelming noises and visions were driving me crazy, so I hoped out with my tool. And my buddy followed and just started letting shots into the bushes around us. I was scared, but I felt like a badass. I truly believed that it was the night I was going to die, and if that's the case, I'm going out with a bang. As all of this is happening, Hun and I both go to reload. Keep in mind Hun and I are both hard-headed and emotional, but the only emotions we both show are anger. I've known this man my whole life and I think we've only seen each other cry once, as we're reloading. Our bodies just become weak. My knees gave out and I guess his did as well. And we both started tearing up. For no apparent reason, and as weeding tearing up we start to puke. Like just out of nowhere, both of us. Just weak on the ground crying and puking. I was trying to fight it and so was he. He started firing off rounds from the ground and I was going to as well, but instead pulled out the rest of the fireworks from my pockets and lit me off. As they shot off into the bush, making seconds of bright light. The shadows, figures and animals and creatures could be seen for just a few seconds. But I guess the noises and the lights of the fireworks or something kinda shook us back up. We weren't sick anymore. Tears still frozen to our face, gaining strength back, we empty the rest of the rounds off into the surrounding woods and run back into the car. G's surprisingly calm, still in the back seat but still obviously worried, asks if we can leave now. She said she's seen enough and doesn't think we're quite ready to end this, so we should go. I listen to it here and quickly and recklessly turn the traction control off and spin the car around. Bombing out as fast as possible. These things still follow us, but Moses was different this time. The clambering metal had turned into more the sound of two rocks being smashed together. The chattering voices became more focused, but still not understandable. We tried to drown it out with the music in the car, but it was like it was stuck in our heads. We finally reached the top of the trail. Remember when I said the snow was fresh, but the storm had stopped? Still no storm, but as we got back to the road our tire tracks weren't there. This all confused us. But the more we tried to reason, the more we tried to think about anything, the more our brains got foggy, so I just kept speeding. As we got back to the boat launch, one owl remained. Still perched on the sign, vigilantly watching us fly down the road. After that there was nothing. There was no more activity, but that night anyway. We stayed pretty silent on the way home, not discussing much. We all wondered if we had gone crazy. Tonight, he and I plan to hang out at our spot and just talk about things. It's still hard to think about. This happened about 15 years ago or so. I used to spend the night at my aunt's house pretty frequently when I was a teenager. They lived in a 2-story house. My aunt and cousins would sleep upstairs, and I would hang out downstairs and watch cable until about midnight and eventually fall asleep on the couch. One night I'm beginning to fall asleep on the couch, with my back facing the room and my front facing the couch, when I hear footsteps running down the steps pretty fast and then back up. I didn't think anything of it because my one cousin would be up all different hours of the night like me and was pretty active. A few moments passed and I heard the same thing again. Again, I thought nothing of it. Until the steps slowed down and began to slowly come towards me. I was frozen. I remember feeling the fear in my body but thinking maybe he was going to the front door to go smoke. When the footsteps were right behind me, and I knew there was no way it could be my cousin anymore, because he wouldn't just stand there behind me, I turned around and no one was there. I never slept over at their house again until recently. Granted, they're aware of a presence in their house that they believe to be my aunt's father. It's no less jarring when something unexplainable happens. When I was a kid, maybe 12 years old I think, I was on a trip with my cousin and her grandmother to Lake Tahoe. We stayed in a motel near the lake. One night I couldn't sleep, and I saw a black shadow move slowly along the wall across from me. The shadow then came off the wall and became a dark figure wearing what looked like a black cloak and hood. I couldn't say anything else about it because the figure looked fuzzy. It moved towards me and stopped at the foot of the bed. I ran into the bathroom and turned on the light. My cousin's grandma woke up and checked on me, but I didn't say what was wrong. I went to sleep after that because it was late. In the morning I saw there was a black spot and a small bit of ash on the carpet at the foot of the bed where the figure was standing. I had not long moved into a new flat. It was only me living there, and the only other people that had been there were a couple of mates and my sister. I still had an old CRT TV, those that know will tell you how good the screen was for gathering dust. One morning I got up as the sun was reflecting on the TV showing off all the dust, but right in the center of the screen was a perfect child's handprint. I had no idea where it came from or how it was untouched by dust. It didn't freak me out as much as one would imagine, but there were a few other instances of things being moved or randomly falling over. Never felt uneasy about it and was always a good wee story to tell. We were helping a friend move a big 500-pound lobster tank from his restaurant in Cambridge to his restaurant in Boston in the late 1970s. There were about 5 of us helping. We began at 4:30 a.m. on summer mornings. After a bit of cajoling it, we got the tank into the truck, and all decided to rest a bit before heading to Boston with the lobster tank. We decided to smoke some weed on the lawn in front of Grendel's Den, a Cambridge institution. No sooner than we lit up, we all saw the most beautiful young woman with long blonde hair wearing a long white nightgown. It took a second, but we all noticed at the same time she was floating, and her feet were nowhere near touching the ground. She was floating away from us towards the side of the restaurant. At that point we all ran in that direction, but in the 5 seconds it took us to get there, she was gone, vanished into thin air, never to be seen again. I've seen some of the other guys from time to time over the years, and no one ever had an explanation other than she was a ghost that we all saw. One night, when I was a teenager/young adult, I honestly don't remember my age, I was playing hide and seek with my friends in the building we all lived in. I heard them calling for me while I was hiding. It took me a few minutes to actually go to them because I thought they were tricking me. When I reached them, we were all looking up at the sky and we saw a line of around 6 or 8 lights, half of them green, half of them orange. They were all lined up vertically. Suddenly, each of them started going in random directions, but never in the same direction and not at the same time. It went on until we weren't able to see them. At the distance, I swear I could see lightning. It was a rainy day, and the color of the lightning was orange as well. All my friends still remember seeing that, but one thing only I saw was, when I was walking towards the elevator to go to my apartment, I decided to look at the distance, in the sky, one last time and I saw a light going towards the floor, like it was something falling from the sky. Until this day, I had no idea what that was. I always believed in aliens, in the sense of I don't believe we are alone in the universe, but this event went straight into my "it was definitely aliens" compartment in my brain. When I was 6, Mom woke my siblings and I up to do some weekend shopping, and first we were supposed to get McDonald's breakfast, which was exciting for us kids back then. When I woke up I immediately felt a sense of dread and told my mom I didn't want to go anywhere although she bribed me with breakfast. I forgot to buckle up after breakfast and randomly while my mom was driving along something told me to buckle up. As I clicked the seatbelt a van crashed into us, and our car hit a brick wall head-on. My mom and stepdad bought a house from the 60s back in 2017. I was still living at home with them. My little brother, mom and stepdad had rooms upstairs, while my room was on the ground floor. One night at about 11:45 p.m., we started hearing slow clicking on the stairway. It's worth noting, we have a cat, which could enter the basement via a cat door in the outside door, which it often did during the night. But this sounded nothing like the cat. These were very, very slow, dragged steps, going up very slowly. I'm not sure if I imagined it, but it sounded like it was slowly ascending the stairs, but never progressing further. I was actually so scared I grabbed a bat from my closet in case it was an intruder. 'Cause you could tell these steps had some weight to them. After the steps had been going on for a while, with my bat in hand, I swung the door open. The stair is just to the right of my door, but there was nothing there. The following day no one mentioned anything, so during breakfast I was like, did anyone else hear what sounded like footsteps on the staircase last night? And my little brother and mom both said yes, but tried not to think too much of it as it was happening. Both are skeptics like me, but for some reason, we still get spooked by creepy things even though none of us believe in it. I've discussed it with both of them a few times after that, and we've all agreed that it definitely sounded like footsteps slowly going up. A few days later, I was doing my laundry down in the basement, and a tiny hatchet/door that leads to a huge, but very low room under the living room, was open. Went up and asked if anyone had been in there, but everyone said no. I genuinely shook, but closed the door and placed a table in front of it. My mom never mentioned to me if she was scared or thought it was intruders, but the following days she placed small metal boxes with coins in them on the handles of the door in the basement leading outside, and to the small hatchet door, but these were never triggered. I moved out no less than a month or so later, but none of them have mentioned anything like it since. I've never experienced anything paranormal or creepy of that sort, and though I love watching shows like Fact or Faked and Ghost Adventures, purely to get the creeps, I don't believe in it. It just doesn't make sense when you think about it. But this event truly scared me, to the point I placed a chair in front of my door before going to bed for the next week or so. My grandma died when I was about 17. My niece was around 4 or 5, very self-aware, and the death of her great-grandma was very confusing for her since it was her first loss. She would bring it up a lot at the most random times and want to talk about great-grandma Kay. In hindsight, this was probably healthy, but it always made everyone uncomfortable because once she started she just would not drop it and you'd be caught in a long, painful conversation that always ended with us having to reiterate grandma was dead, gone forever, and never coming back. One night, my niece was getting ready for bed and wanted to go through a book I had gotten her. It was that huge book of pictures from the Hubble telescope. As we were looking through it and my niece was asking me a few questions about all the stars and stuff, my great oratory skills must have done something to spark in her young little mind the sheer magnitude of the spectacle we were seeing. She suddenly asked if that space was where great-grandma was. I started to explain in the best way I could that I didn't really understand what she meant, and that though some people believe you go somewhere when you die I personally didn't and whatever else. Then she said she had some of great-grandma's jewelry and wanted to show me and pulled a little box she had hidden away in the bed with her out full of my grandma's costume jewelry and some other effects. Things started to get a little intense at this point. We were alone in this back bedroom and my sister was quite a way away, no one else in the house. My niece was all wrapped up in her bed, an electric heater humming along beside her, and an old, tiny TV was playing some Disney movie in a corner. She asked another question, which I've since forgotten what it was, and as I started to talk, in no particular order, I felt a cold breeze over my neck and the hair stand up on end. The heater, which had been mostly silent, made a very violent bang, and a primal fear gripped me. On a dime, the room was energized, hanging on a knife edge. I stopped talking, looked at my niece and watched her sit up looking at the corner of the room and say, "Grandma?" I followed her eyes to that corner. The door was barely cracked and between where it swung open and a closet stood there was a small, dark space with a coat rack. A bathrobe hung on the coat rack with a scarf wrapped among the hooks over it. My grandma died from cancer and had been wasting away for over a year. When she died she weighed less than 80 pounds and walked around in a bathrobe with a scarf wrapped around her head. I'm not sure what I saw exactly, but it was like a small, shrunken, and tan form in that bathrobe and scarf took form there and was going to emerge from that space. The cliché about your blood running cold is legit. I hit the ejection button on the whole situation and looked away, standing up and loudly saying okay, that's enough of that, and broke my niece's attention from whatever that was going on over there. Adrenaline, or whatever it was, I didn't even bother to check the situation again and walked over and opened the door, mostly covering up the space with the coat rack with the door and getting my sister. My sister is an evil woman and was very angry about this bedtime disturbance. She passed me in the hall on the way back and I heard as she walked into the room behind me my niece says, "Mom, we saw Grandma," and my sister cut her off yelling that it was bedtime and she needed to cut the grandma and go to bed and whatever else. I felt bad that she was getting in trouble and was also a little ashamed, and embarrassed about what just happened, so I just kind of lingered outside sheepishly. My sister has gotten progressively worse since then and eventually lost custody of my niece for being terrible. Anyway, my niece saw a ghost and then getting yelled at for it put a pretty weird cap on the whole experience. I eventually went back in there, after promising my sister no more BS, and tucked my niece in. She kept trying to ask me, quietly, if I saw her, too, and I just ignored the question and said it's time for bed, good night, we'll go do something fun tomorrow. It's been years since this happened and my niece is growing up into quite the little devil, swapping her grainy old Disney movies on a 20-inch TV for an iPad and TikTok and the cold, back bedroom she shared with her mom into her own big new room at her dad's house. But she's asked me a few times since then, do you remember when we saw Grandma? I've never given her an answer, but would like to someday, I'm just not sure what to say. I don't believe in ghosts, and I was really high at the time, probably in a mentally suggestible space, because of it. I'm not sure enough of what I saw. But there is no doubt that the heater made that loud banging sound it had never made before or since, and I have no explanation for how absolutely and how suddenly I went from completely fine to absolutely gripped by cold fear. The whole room went from perfectly normal to synced up, energized, and very cold before I even knew what was happening. My dad passed away in March of last year, 2022. He had struggled with many issues like addiction and points from being in the Navy. When I was a kid, he constantly listened to Pink Floyd as it was one of his favorite bands. So, a couple weeks after his passing, my family goes to his house, tiny 12 by 10 foot cabin in the woods, to clean it and do the typical emptying of the fridge and whatnot. After we finished up, it was depressing and we all just wanted to go home. My aunt, who was driving, turned on the radio onto a random station and Wish You Were Here by Pink Floyd came on. We all looked at each other for confirmation that it was happening and just smiled because it felt like he was there with us. My dad was a prankster, and he was probably the least materialistic person I knew. His will said I bequeath all my possessions to my 2 children, as for a funeral, don't bother. Take the least expensive route possible. One day before my grandpa was to be cremated, I had a very vivid dream. In my dream I was woken up by someone knocking on the door to my flat. I went to the door, asked who is it, and someone, in my dream I assumed it was my grandpa, but I was not aware that he was dead, though I knew it in reality, said that he has his teeth now, which sounded very strange and absurdly. I couldn't make any sense of it, so I said okay, but I can't let you in. The thing is that I didn't want to let him in my apartment was that though it was S dream, I felt that something is not right, and I can't be sure that it really is my grandpa. He walked away. I could hear his steps on the stairs, and the way they sounded actually put me into guilt about not inviting him, because then I was certain that it was my grandpa. The next day after my dream I met my parents before the cremation ceremony, and I told them about my dream. They went silent for a few seconds and exchanged strange looks. My dad told me that the day before my grandpa was to be cremated, he found his proper dentures, because my grandpa had been using the backup ones for a few weeks, which wasn't fully suitable for him, so his speech had been weird. People from the morgue put my grandpa his dentures before the cremation, due to the open cask. Then I remembered that before my grandpa's death, we talked on the phone almost every day, and after each conversation I was a little annoyed that my grandpa is calling me over important stuff, but is after one drink too far. That was because his speech was impaired by the spare dentures, which I wasn't aware of. So, my best guess is that the night before the cremation, my grandpa came to me in my dream to say goodbye and I did not let him in. The only weird thing is that to this day, I remember this strange feeling from my dream, that I should not invite him in. I hope you are at peace, Grandpa. I love you. When I was a child I remember going into my basement to make a fort and watch DIV all night, knowing my mother usually didn't allow this. So, I waited for her and my dad to fall asleep and I put my DIV at maybe 6 volumes to keep it quiet. At maybe 2 or 3 on the morning I heard my mother calling my name in a really friendly manner and I thought to myself how I am just about to get busted. Then I realized I never heard my mother leave her room or go down the stairs. I did not go to sleep till the sun rose up. When I was around 18 I came home from work at like 11 p.m. and went to my bedroom, which was a cabin out the back garden. I got into bed, but it was a warm summer night, so I didn't cover myself in a duvet. I heard the door handle creaking and the next thing I felt was the duvet going over my body and the door handle creaking again. I got up and double-checked. I definitely locked the door with the key, and I was wide awake, so I don't think I imagined it. We called him the Whistling Man. I never believed in ghosts, or paranormal things in general. We lived further outside of our college campus. It was a walk through a dark alley to get there. Multiple people in our group had the same experience at separate times, and we didn't know until someone brought it up. While walking home, you will hear a set of jingling keys, loud walking, and a man whistling a tune over and over. None of us can remember what the tune truly sounded like. He would come up behind you, and you would move to let him pass. But no one would be there. You turn your head around, and there is no one behind you. No one beside you. No one around you. The whistling man. I don't know, bro. In the house we used to live in just when my parents were about to move in after it was finished happened a murder in the house next door. I didn't know why as a kid I always felt uneasy to stay alone in a room or sleep in the house. It got to the point where I had been sleeping with my parents in their bed until I was 15 years old because for me it was like something was watching me constantly and felt in danger somehow. I know it is embarrassing, but that's how bad the feeling of something there was. I never told my friends about this because I was, and still am, embarrassed about me sleeping with my parents as a 15-year-old. One night I was up late, and my parents had gone to sleep. By this point I could stand being alone in the living room, when all of a sudden I heard the bathroom door close, one of many creepy things that happened like sudden knocks in doors or shadows you could see but then after a second weren't there. I almost had a heart attack. I ran crying to my parents and stayed the night with them. I know it was the lady who was murdered next door. Next year we moved to our current house and never have I been calmer in my life. No shadows, no noises, no shaky feelings, something is watching me in my bed. I can now sleep alone and stay alone without that feeling of danger. At first I thought I was crazy, but now I know I wasn't. I can't really understand how or why that lady's ghost was in our house, but I'll never forget it. I was driving into town and coming around a winding part of the road. As I'm nearing a blind turn, I felt a cold breeze blow across towards me. I had the heat blowing at me, so this just seemed odd. I even glanced over to the passenger side quickly. And then I suddenly thought of my mom, who was passed on. Then I took a turn, and there was a truck in my lane driving like a bat out of hell. I was able to swerve to the shoulder and avoid a head-on collision. I think my mom was my passenger that day. My dream predicted a future event. This happened fairly recently. I was on a road trip and sitting in the middle row. It was pretty cramped, and I slept with my head against the seat in front of me and my neck curving in a way which created a not-so-safe position. While sleeping I had a dream that a car crashed into the back of our and I snapped my neck. I woke up and was going to put my head back in that position, but I just kept thinking about the dream, so I decided to just lean my head against the window. Not 20 minutes later a car crashed into ours, I think like 50 miles per hour. Cops came and said that the person that crashed into us never tried to brake because there were no skid marks on the road to indicate that. Everyone involved is fine with just having some back pain. I still wonder, and it freaks me out a bit, of what would have happened if I didn't move how I was positioned. I was buying shoes with my mom, and I was already desperate. You know, I was 10 years old and for me, it was the most boring thing in the world. I calmed down a bit because, in the shoe store, they put the channel that broadcasted Pokemon. At the moment my mom decided it was time to go, I begged her to stay to finish the episode, but she said no. We were relatively far from home, about 11 or 12 miles, so it was a trip of at least half an hour. When we finally got there I turned on the television and Pokemon was still on, and the most amazing thing is that the scene had barely progressed. In my country, only one channel broadcasts it, and always at the same time. I have never felt so afraid. I was driving from my parents' house to my house one day, which is about a 3-hour drive. Around 8 a.m. I saw a woman walking on the side of the road that my parents live on. The part of the road with no houses and a small shoulder. They live in the middle of nowhere, so it was weird to just see someone walking. She was older, maybe around 50 years. Long, unkempt gray hair. Black or dark blue hoodie, sweatpants, and slippers. She was tall and a bit large. She looked ashamed, like she just did something embarrassing. I didn't pay her much attention, I just thought it was weird because people don't normally walk on that stretch of road. About 2 hours later, I was driving in the hills where there's no service, no houses, no cell reception. And I saw that same woman, walking, in the same direction, same shameful look about her. Again, I didn't think much of it. Only that it was strange. People don't normally walk this part of the highway unless they break down, but there were no cars around her and she didn't seem distressed, only shameful. A half hour later, I was driving on the road that I live on, and I saw that same shameful, homeless-looking woman. Again, I thought it was odd as I had never seen her on my street before. I passed her, then looked back realizing that I had seen her twice before. This happened when I was 6. I woke up hungry as hell, but I didn't want to wake up my parents, so I go to the kitchen and grab an apple from the bowl of fruit. But when I turn around, I froze in fear as there was someone in my kitchen. It looked like a paper pale person, with a broken at the bottom and dirty white dress with a black hair that covered its face. When I got closer to try to speak with it, it became a shadow and vanished before my very eyes. Only one person has believed me at the moment due to this lady having the exact same characteristics of a Mexican myth called La Llorona. In every dream I have, I'm never myself. I'm looking through the eyes of a character. However, there were 3 different times I was instantly transported to the front door of my house as myself. To the left of the door, if you walk in, are stairs going down and a bathroom door at the bottom. I looked downstairs, and the bathroom door was open with a purple light coming from the back of it. You can only see a little bit of the bathroom until you start going down, but I would hear female whispers in my head telling me over and over again how badly I needed to go into the bathroom. I never said anything. I just had the feeling that no matter what, I should not go into the bathroom. I just stared, and then I would go back into the previous dream as if it had never happened. It happened a second time, and the whispers were louder, again telling me I needed to go into the bathroom. I needed to, yet I only stared and didn't say a thing. When I came to the third and last time, however, instead of pleading normally, the whispers said that they were my uncle. They were begging me to go into the bathroom, pleading that I had to see what was in the bathroom. Unlike the previous times, however, I spoke to it. I said, "You know, that's really weird. You have a very feminine voice for you to be my uncle." After that, it went dead silent. No whispers, no ambient noise, just me continuing to stare at the bathroom, and I had a dreadful feeling that I had made a big mistake, and then I woke up. I've never had something like that before, and after the last time, it never happened again, nothing even close. Years before, I'd been lying in bed and would get an uneasy feeling out of nowhere. I felt like someone was in my bedroom with me. My hair would stand, and I'd get the craziest goosebumps I'd ever get. Sometimes it'd pass, but one particular time I fought it back and tried to ignore it, and then it felt like someone laid on me. An unmistakable weight was put on me, until I decided to move myself, then it slowly lifted from me. When I was about 12, I went to a school disco, and during one song my friend was trying to talk to me on the dance floor, shouting in my ear above the music. I'm straining to hear his words, then bang. Suddenly I'm in the passenger seat of my mother's car driving home from the disco. I said something like I should still be there, what's going on, and she looked at me like I was crazy. 2 hours vanished in the blink of an eye. No drugs, no drink, no history of seizures before or since. 30 years later I still puzzle over this. When I was about 10. My mom, sister, 6, and I were in the car on the way to the store. Still remember clearly as day we had a black Dodge Durango. My sister and I were sitting in the third row, the radio was playing Move Your Body by Nina Sky, and out of nowhere without thinking I blurted out, "Let's see who can put their seatbelts on the fastest." I kid you not, 3 seconds after we fastened our seatbelts a car comes flying through a stop sign and T-boned our car, causing our car to roll 3 times. I still remember paramedics telling my mother, who suffered scratches and deep bruising due to not wearing her seatbelt, that it's a miracle that my sister and I made it out without a single scratch on us. I was about 15. My mother was deep in the throes of pain medication and alcohol addiction. She tried to hide it, but it was obvious to me and my 3 younger siblings that something was wrong, but we didn't know exactly what it was at the time. She would stay in the guest room, away from my dad, and the claim was that she was sick. One night my little sister wanted to sleep with her in the guest room. That night, I woke up in a frenzy and scared like I'd never been scared before. I laid awake for hours trying to fall back asleep. I wanted to go to my parents, but I was too afraid to leave the room. The next day, my mom told me how my little sister started hyperventilating and whimpering in her sleep. My mom felt for her temperature, she was burning up. My mom told me there's something demonic in the room that night, and whatever it was there for my mom. I didn't even tell her about my own experience. For me, her story was the nail in the coffin that confirmed something was definitely in our house that night. There was an old lady sitting at our dining table. After a few weeks of living in an abandoned house I just bought, I saw an old lady sitting on a dining chair while resting her hands on the dining table. I thought I was just seeing things, because when I looked away and looked back she wasn't there, and it's impossible for anyone to enter the house. The doors were locked, and we have a guard dog inside the house. I see her from time to time at the exact same spot, but I never tried talking. I think I'm just hallucinating, but there were days that she's there even if I look away and look back, just sitting there like a statue. I just ignored it though, because people might say I'm going crazy if I tell anyone, until one day my daughter cried and said she saw a ghost. I asked her what ghost, and she mentioned an old lady sitting in the exact same spot I always see her. Then a few months after we hired a maid, and on the first night the maid saw the old lady too. It was just me and her at the house that time. My daughter was in my sister's house, and no one could have told her about that lady. I pretended and kept on pretending that I didn't see that lady until we moved. The maid and my daughter just zipped their mouth about too. We don't know if it really was a ghost or just an illusion or anything. We just stopped talking about it because it sounds like we're just making stuff up. I heard that the old owner of the house passed away when I bought the house, but I didn't ask any questions. My nephew, my sister's middle boy, at about 4 to 6 years of age, used to have mean man nightmares, we called them. In the middle of the night, we would hear him start yelling mean man in his room. Sometimes he'd be hiding behind the door, and sometimes he would be sitting in the middle of his bed with the covers over him, but always repeating mean man, mean man, mean man. In the few instances we got him to respond to us during an episode, he always looked towards and pointed to the window. Which you may think meant maybe someone was watching him, but his room was on the second story, and inaccessible in every way. I'll never forget it. It was terrifying at the moment. A couple years back I lived in a rental property. This house was built in the 40s. One day I was taking a nap when I woke up. Every wall, the floor, the ceiling, were covered in red blood writing. I couldn't understand a word of it. I was freaked out, shaking my head from side to side, taking everything in. Then I blinked and it was all gone. Everything was back to normal. I left the house for a while. I couldn't stay there. We moved a month later. That house is also the only house I have ever had nightmares on almost a nightly basis. Glad I don't live there anymore. My brother is about 4 years older than me. When he was young, about 5 years old, he started mentioning a man with a blue bike. This slightly concerned my parents, as some of my brother's stories about that man were quite eerie. Though when he was about 7 years old this all stopped. When I reached the same age, I started talking about that same man. Playing with him, laughing with him, even crying with him. This creeped up my parents even more because they hadn't told me about those stories, yet I described him the same way as my brother did. And once again the man disappeared when I was around 7 years old. My mother and I both saw an apparition when I was a teenager, but for some reason that didn't have the same impact on me, perhaps because I only saw it for a split second, and even though my mother saw it too, not seeing it for that long made it easy to ignore that it happened. The thing that really affected me, a little bit to this day, is I absolutely can look outside windows when it's dark outside, lasted longer than a split second, and happened in early 2010. It was late at night, and I was working on an assignment for the apprenticeship I was studying. I was completely lucid and engaged because it was a subject I enjoyed and did well in. I live upstairs from the ground floor. I use this wording because it's called different things depending on where you live, and my window was uncovered, the curtains had been removed and I had yet to replace them. I lived on a quiet street, and everything was dead and still outside, until it wasn't. In my peripheral, I saw the movement of a white-colored thing about the size of a person. I expected it to just be a trick of my eyes that would vanish when I looked over, but it didn't vanish. I ended up staring at a full-bodied apparition, hovering level with where I was in my home, over the quiet street outside my window. It glided at the pace of a light jog and then gradually faded away. While I was looking at it, as I had plenty of time to, I realized that this figure was translucent and had no facial features that I could see. Think how Slender Man's face looks, translucent arms and legs faded into totally transparent hands and feet. I think the figure was wearing what looked like formal wear, a suit, but everything was that same pale translucent white, so it was difficult to tell. I experienced a bit of a mind break as I tried to process and rationalize what I saw. My first thought was that it was some kind of reflection or projection, but as I said, the street was totally dead, and nobody was around. The featureless face really did it for me. I called my friend through ugly sobs to have some sort of comfort and share what I saw. Years later, I asked my friend if that call really happened, and they looked visibly uncomfortable and asked not to talk about it. They don't want to know what I saw that made me react the way I did. They know me as a rational and thoughtful person, their description, not mine lol, so I can understand why it disturbs them as well. I've had some unexplainable incidents since then, but none affected me the way this one did, since I still default to finding rational explanations whenever I see something weird. I consider this to be really when I was directly faced with something utterly unfathomable and had to come to terms with that. I used to be a skeptic, I still am to an extent, but I'm much more open-minded now. I understand that to skeptics, reading someone's experience like this isn't enough to change your mind, since it wouldn't have been for me. You need to experience it. I'm not sure whether I hope you do, because it was pretty harrowing for me, but my change in mindset as a result of this also changed how I look at everything in general, including the way I talk and think about other people, so I do appreciate that it did that for me. So I live in the top floor 2-story house, where my bed is. It's in the middle of my room, and there's a little wall right next to my bed on the right. If you look over the wall, there's stairwell that's probably about 15 deep from top to bottom. One night I woke up, and you know how you wake up and you know something is watching you, you're fully alert, right? I felt that, and I also noticed that the air conditioner was making a horrible low groan. And I looked over to my right and I saw a head, shoulders, and hands, and a set of glowing red eyes staring at me, hanging on the side of that wall on the opposite side from me. I made eye contact with the thing for a good 15 seconds, and then I blinked and looked away and just didn't look back, and I heard it scamper into the air vent with an audible grunt. Needless to say, I didn't sleep well that night and had it for a while. And I sleep with a high-power flashlight and a machete very close to my bed. I saw a ghost in my old house when I was around 13 years old. I had leapt over a grave in town. Next thing, a woman and spirit entity appeared. I remember the feet, they were bare. She had an old-fashioned long dress on, so all you saw was a grayish face, no details. I remember the animosity coming off that thing. No, I wasn't high or drunk. I was an 80s rap fiend. Late 80s, I shouted a prayer and waved my cross. It stayed for a good 5 seconds, then vanished. Secondly, an apparition held me down and tried to assault me. I woke up and was being held down by something crawling all over me. Yuck! I was half asleep and fought it off. Very strong, heavy, evil entity. Yuck! Last one, our beloved loyal cat was put to sleep due to a brain tumor. She cried, poor cat, the family howled. Then she came back, dearest be furry queen cat, and walked on my body. I was comforted. I can still feel her little paws walking on me. The last 2 incidents took place in a flat built in a very gothic old area. I kept getting burgled. You could sense the energy. Some psycho was intimidating me, killed my poor kitten. Hope karma destroys animal abusers and burglars and evil muttering people. Negative spirit energy? Very old gothic houses, seen a lot. And I get deja vu, true. This happened not even a year ago. I was still studying at the unit and living in a shared house with a bunch of my friends. A few of us were sitting in the living room, a big room with a huge window on one side that almost took up the entire wall. Also, for detail's sake, the door to the living room was open as well. It always was, and the layout of the house was strange, so the doorway was in a corner and tucked out of the way, nowhere near the big window. We were watching TV one day, in the middle of the day, still bright outside, when for a split second the whole window went black. This huge window is blacked out. We were spaced quite far away from the road and also in a pretty quiet suburban area, so it wasn't a big truck speeding past or anything like that. Whatever it was had to be huge to black out this entire window. Either way, I didn't say anything. Mostly because one of my other housemates couldn't handle anything scary and I didn't want to unnecessarily freak everyone out, and also because we were a bunch of filthy stoners, except nobody was stoned at that time. A few moments go by when my housemate, the one who was very scared very easily, pipes up with, "Did you guys see that?" I was immediately like, yes. I did see that. The whole window went dark. What was that about? But then my housemate shook his head and said, no, I meant in the doorway. The doorway went dark like something moved across it. Freaked everyone right out, never figured out what it was. My wife and daughter claimed to see shadow people at nearly every house we've lived in. I was in the military, so we moved around a lot, and there were only a couple of places where they didn't see anything. In the past, my wife used to see the infamous shadow man with top hat at a couple of houses, but now it's just a general black man shape. At our current house, they both claimed to have seen a black figure out on the deck, from both inside and outside the house, downstairs in the game room, and at the top of the stairs going to the basement. My daughter also claims to have heard movement on the stairs that sounds like me walking in my slippers. They also claim to have feelings when they go downstairs. I, on the hand, believe in this stuff, but I never felt anything, heard anything, or saw anything. I'm kind of like Fuyuki from Sergeant Frog, I believe, but I'm insensitive to the paranormal. The most I've seen is a quick shadow flicker on all from the Christmas lights in my office. They are behind me, and twice now there has been what seemed like a very quick shadow that moved across the wall in front of me. However, it could just be a millisecond drop in the lights and not a true shadow. Since I haven't heard anything or seen anything, I trust what they say but can't provide my personal opinion. When I was younger, 9 to 11 maybe, my sister and I stayed up late watching TV since it was a summer night. Randomly, we hear footsteps coming from the kitchen behind us. When we look, our mom is standing in the middle of the kitchen with her eyes completely shut. We try to get her attention, but she just stands there for minutes silently with her eyes closed. Eventually, what felt like forever at the time, our mom turns around and slowly walks back through the hallway to bed, never making a sound. We were pretty creeped out and paranoid since it was really late. We decided to go to my sister's room and just chill in there for the rest of the night. While we're talking, my sister's cross, that has both sides connected by a metal angel that tightly keeps it together, on the wall breaks. The angel shoots off and the cross pieces fall. It didn't fly across the room, but it went further than something just casually falling should. It took us half an hour to find the angle, since her room was messy. After that, we were pretty scared and waited till our dad came out for a drink and explained what happened. Not sure what happened tph. Our mom has never slept or walked in the past, and even now, that was the only time it has ever happened. I've got a couple to share. The first one happened when I was about 13 to 14, and it still happens nowadays from time to time. We drove home and my parents and brother left the car to go to the store. I was alone in the car, and I started hearing this heavy breathing coming from the left-hand seat, where my brother was. I was sitting next to it in the right-hand seat. I thought I was hallucinating and maybe hearing myself breathe, so I took a deep breath and stopped breathing. The heavy breathing continued at the same pace, although I was definitely not breathing, and my heart started pounding. I still hear this from time to time when I lay to sleep. The second one is a dream I had very recently, about 2 weeks ago or so. I was at work and was entering the bar area in our workplace. Right at the entrance, the area was heavily crowded, and everyone was wearing a white formal shirt, like one of those shirts that you wear to a wedding. What's strange about this dream is that the cloth they were wearing were extremely bright and shiny, like to the point where it was hurting my eyes. As I make my way past the crowd, I notice that people are staring at me with a disgusted look on their face, and I believe that I was not wearing a white shirt. I turned around to look, and there were actually 2 to 3 people wearing normal colored non-shiny everyday t-shirts, but I didn't bother to ask them what was going on. I woke up right after and I had this confused and uncanny feeling about the dream. Not paranormal, but very unexplainable or logical at all. In the car one night as a kid, me and my sisters all saw men's faces in the window. We all happened to be looking out. At my aunt's house, my cousin, sister, and I were all up watching Sonic the Hedgehog at like 1 a.m. and me and my cousin glanced down the hallway from where we were laying, him in the recliner, me on the couch. Both with a full view of the hallway, and we both saw a tall, dark figure walk from his room, right across the hallway to his parents. Was definitely not his dad because the figure's head dragged the ceiling, making it taller than 6 feet 3 inches or 6 feet 4 inches. Also at same aunt's house, a cup that was halfway towards the middle of her dining room table just fell off and shattered, sending glass and water everywhere. We were all confused, and the adults didn't believe us. My grandma's house. Me and same cousin were laying on the couch bed watching Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. My sister was asleep on the couch and my other sister in the chair. I glance up to see a man standing right by the couch. I wasn't scared, and so I turned to my cousin and asked him to look, but the guy wasn't there. The next night, same setup, but I looked toward the hallway and the door to the room my parents were in was open, and there was a girl in a nightgown. Glance away and back, she's gone, room door shut. Walmart in the town I live in currently, girl with pale white skin, long black hair, full black eyes, and dressed in full black comes down the aisle only my fam is on. My parents didn't see her, me and my sisters didn't. My parents were home alone soon after my brother had open heart surgery, us older 4 girls were at my grandma's house along with our dogs. My mom and stepdad hear someone walking in the kitchen. Not just walking, stomping. My stepdad picked us up a day early. I was lying in bed and felt my blanket slowly being pulled off of me. No one was in my room. No one but my mom and stepdad were awake. I was lying in bed and heard footsteps in the hallway. I even saw a shadow. No one was there, only my mom and stepdad up. These are only the ones I can remember or that I deemed good enough for here. When I was around 4, I was in reception, or whatever the equivalent is outside of the UK, maybe kindergarten I don't know, but this girl, if I remember correctly her name was Emmy, wouldn't leave me alone. From the moment I walked through the door to the moment I went home, she was just there, standing right next to me. At the time, it really weirded me out because I didn't have any friends and didn't particularly talk to anyone other than teachers and my family. For the entire year until she left, I couldn't get her to leave me alone until the class went outside, in which case, she'd disappear and wouldn't show up again until we went back inside. It's been around 10 years since, and I don't know whether I should have been scared because she was always there or happy because I had someone there. My best guess as to why she did that was because she may have liked me romantically, but if she did I would be none the wiser. Because she left the school near the end of that same year, I never had a chance to ask her why because I was terrible socially. I have too. Trigger warning: mention of suicide and seizure-like activity. One day I was listening to a certain song. The last line of the song is "Loving you is suicide." Okay, I've heard this song multiple times before and nothing out of the ordinary happened. Well, I was listening to the song at my house, and I was headed back to my room when the last line hit. I heard a voice that sounded like it was coming from behind me, and I felt and saw arms wrapping around me. No physical body, no face, just a head next to mine and being hugged from behind. It lasted for a few seconds, then disappeared. I was very frightened by this experience, and it still gives me chills. The other one, I woke up in the middle of the night unable to control my body. You're probably thinking, oh, sleep paralysis, but you are dead wrong. There was no demon, as they are usually called, and I was seizing up and convulsing and twitching. I was doing it for 5 to 15 minutes fully conscious and aware it was happening. Took test and had MRIs and other tests done, but nothing out of the ordinary showed up. So when I was younger I would mess around with dream control quite a bit. It went fine, but occasionally I felt like my mind was playing tricks on me because I thought I would occasionally catch glimpses of people without faces. Girl. I brushed it off initially because I thought it was just my eyes playing tricks on me, but it started happening for longer or became more noticeable. The last time I seen one of them pulled out in front of my uncle and we almost hit them. I could tell my uncle had seen them too though when he looked back and looked mortified at what he had seen. The only correlation I have between that and DC was that I stopped seeing them around the time I stopped trying to manipulate my dreams. A few years ago, me and my family went on a trip to Turkey, Istanbul, and were roaming the streets. We were walking on the sidewalk where on the right side was the street and the left side was a very big graveyard. My family starts picking up speed besides me and my father. A moment as I start to kind of jog to my mom and my other siblings. I squeeze through the crowd. When I get to the gate of the graveyard there's a big empty gap kind of between the crowd and I see this man facing the street, gray dusty hair, gray dusty / ashy yet very pale skin with his clothes also ashy and gray and black. He turns his head and is now staring at me. And I stare back. I have an uneasy feeling and start looking for my dad or mom. I don't know whether to go to my mom who I could see a small distance behind him or my dad who was somewhere behind me. As I look behind me to see where my dad is I peek behind me and see his body facing me, before he was facing the street. I was shaky and scared and started to feel that feeling where I'm about to cry. I sprint looking for my dad pushing and shoving through the people. I didn't turn back too scared that I might see him again. I finally found my dad, who was confused on why I was on the verge of crying and why I was scared out of my mind. I tell him about the man, but he kind of just brushes it off and we start heading to my mom and other siblings. As we passed the big gate, I didn't see him. I looked to my left and right and on the other side of the road. I think to myself he couldn't have gotten far. Yet he was nowhere to be seen. I told my mom about it, and she as well brushed it off and said I was probably just imagining things. I still have a vivid memory of this, and I honestly don't know what to think or say. I've told some of my friends, but I feel like they just think I'm making it up, but I swear I'm not. Worst in recent memory, at my mental lowest and bordering on suicidality last March, I was alone watching a movie and a song played. I thought it was part of the film. Paused out of curiosity when the volume seemed too loud. The lyrics about feminine rage and insanity continued to rattle off a soul speaker in the foyer. It was followed by a spiritual pop song I did not recognize. My blood ran cold. I switched the second song off before I could Shazam it, unplugged, checked all the house's devices, and it was not from a source within the house. Left after texting friends worriedly. Half an hour later I came back and peeped in every room. Nada. Nobody, nothing. I guzzled wine out of stress and passed out clutching a knife under my pillow. Very the call is coming from inside the house moment. I know I didn't hallucinate this, because I filmed myself reacting when the song was blaring as proof for my friends. I don't like being alone now. It's nothing exciting, maybe just my mind playing tricks on me. I live alone in a house, and during the cold seasons I have the habit of closing my bedroom door at night so that the gas heater in my room can work more efficiently in warming up my room. The light is outside my bedroom door and there is this 2 centimeters gap beneath my door that lets the light from the outside in. Every now and then I catch a glimpse of a shadow moving in the light outside my bedroom door, like when someone stands outside your door, and you can tell because their shadow is visible from under the door. Every time it happens I stare 10 seconds longer at my door to see if it happens again, and it doesn't. But it happens almost every night. I choose to believe that it's just my eyes playing tricks on me. Because the alternative is either very exciting or very terrifying depending on your point of view or beliefs. I also once was woken up by a very loud bang at 3 a.m. from behind my house about 6 weeks ago. So, I grabbed a flashlight and went outside to investigate the source of the sound and found it. There was this very large, tall, and heavy unused iron pillar that I had leaned on the back wall because I had nowhere else to put it. It belonged to an old front gate that was replaced 2 years ago. Anyways, I found it fallen on the ground in the back garden. There was no strong wind that night to have been able to move it and make it fall. It was too heavy for a stray cat to jump on it and make it fall, and I saw nobody in the front or backyard who may have stumbled upon it by accident. So, either it was someone jumping into my backyard snooping and accidentally hitting the pillar and taking off as soon as it fell, or it was something supernatural. I chose the former explanation as the reason for the pillar falling, which is scary enough in and of itself, but some people who have commented here may pick the latter as the reason, which is also scary but on a whole other level. I moved schools last year, but the school I was in before has a lot of history with death and the building is quite old, at least 300 years. It used to be a hospital, apparently, and a student died around 10 years ago. There's also a graveyard next to it that was built around the same time as the school to make burying dead patients easier. Last March or so, we had a complete power outage. No big deal, it just means free period for the rest of the day. This was back when COVID was pretty bad, so we had a one-person in bathroom at a time policy. Well, I had to go to the bathroom, and because it's pitch black, the teacher hands me a flashlight and tells me to try not to trip on anything. I left my phone at home that day so I couldn't use that. I walked in the bathroom, the sink starts running then immediately stops when I point the flashlight at it. Now, I'm pretty creeped out at this point, but no big deal. It must be Josephine messing around, the student that died. We call her Josephine, and she likes to play tricks on us. She's friendly though. I lock myself in the stall, do my business, and as I wash my hands, I see a dark silhouette of a person standing behind me, and it's not Josephine because she was 13 when she died, and this looks like a grown man. At least 6 foot tall. I get a feeling of uneasiness and danger. I ran out panicking and my best friend asked me what's wrong. I tell her and she freaks out. I never went into that bathroom again. Edit, the bathroom was an L shape with the shorter end facing the door, so you go through a small hallway type thing and the stalls are there, and then if you walk in farther there's 2 sinks. No windows, and it's pretty big as well. Maybe like half the size of a normal classroom. I got surgery when I was 17, they gave me Vicodin. I had the worst dreams ever about it. One dream really took the cake though. In dream, I woke up from the bed that I really was sleeping in. I used the bathroom attached to the room, washed my hands, and walked out. As soon as I walked out of the bathroom I heard the faucet running. I thought I must have forgotten to turn it off, so I went back in and did so. Walking out of the bathroom again, and once again it turns on. This time I freak out and begin to run for the ajar door leading to the hallway. The door slams closed and suddenly something invisible grabs me by the throat and throws me onto the wall. I struggle but can't break free. It then throws me on the bed, and I wake up as soon as it does, in the same exact position that I was thrown. I have 2 more awful dreams from that time. Didn't touch that drug ever again. Real hellscapes. This happened when I was on a school trip. After visiting some stupid town museum, we were allowed to roam around the town for an hour or so. Me and 8 of my friends found a shabby-looking cafe/restaurant thing at the end of a street. It didn't look quite clean, but the aroma of the food was too good to ignore. So, we went in. That's about as much as any of us remembers. After maybe 10 minutes, we found ourselves staring at the empty parking lot opposite it. And when we turned around there was nothing but an empty plot. We were scared less and ran back to our bus. 6 of us remember exactly the same things, as I described above, while the other 3 only remember the smell of the food. The best thing we came up with was that we somehow glitched into another dimension and lost all memories of it after we came back. Or maybe witches/aliens or something. I've got 2 experiences. The first was in a very old apartment above a flower shop. The shoe place just had an eerie vibe to it, but we didn't think anything of it. It was technically 2 bedrooms, but the second bedroom was pretty small. More useful as an office. The master bedroom was pretty decently sized and had a closed closet on one side that was probably 4 feet by 10 feet. I hated being in it. I'm not claustrophobic, but it just unsettled me. However, the room, was always ice cold and dark. It was latched closed, with an eye hook, and it was always pushed out just a little bit. It was definitely the most uncomfortable feeling room in the house. My wife said she had some odd stuff happen every now and then, but I personally hadn't seen anything until the fateful morning. We had just gotten off work and were tired and hungry. I threw out the idea of ordering a pizza, so we didn't have to make anything. So, I put in the order, we wait a few and jump out of bed. I distinctly remember watching my wife leave the bedroom first, and the light was on. When we got home, only 10 to 15 minutes later, we hurried back to bed with pizza in tow. Except the absolutely on light was off. A couple days later when we were in the car, I mentioned it and she thought I had turned it off before we left, but that she definitely didn't. Creeps me. We eventually moved a month early because she heard some creepy voice that said it was going to kill her. My second story is about a house where we were helping my wife's parents fix up. There are 2 things that happened to me there. The first was on a day it was only my wife and I there. There was a tied curtain in a back room. It had been tied for at least a couple weeks. Shortly after we arrived, I happened to glance back there and saw it very slowly, very deliberately unraveling. Over the course of about 10 minutes, I kept glancing over and saw it completely untied, and then completely unfurl. We then promptly left and never came back alone. The second thing there was when I was taking down all of the hardware over the upstairs windows while my wife and her dad were downstairs doing stuff. While I was focusing on taking some blind holders off, I heard distinct footsteps coming up the stairs and down the hall to the room I was in. Then they stopped, right in the doorway. I was kind of weirded out and didn't want to turn my head to look, so I just kept working, expecting, maybe even hoping to hear her dad say something. But nothing came. After about 30 seconds, I heard footsteps again walking away, but not downstairs. Then I heard my wife's dad come in from outside and start talking to my wife. Then he headed outside again for something. I promptly finished what I was doing and went downstairs and asked my wife if her dad had gone upstairs for anything. And she said no. It freaked me out. Saw a ghost when I was 14 in a church. Long story short, when I was younger and used to go to church, we used to do this fundraiser where the youth would make and sell applesauce. Then we sleep over in the lounge room. It was 2 a.m. I was fully awake laying on my back and a full-on apparition of a man walked into the room, stared directly at me for about 10 seconds. I screamed, it slowly exited the room, and as soon as it was out of sight everyone in the room woke up. I'm 26 and can replay the event in my head like it happened yesterday. The reason I think it was a ghost and not a person is because there were multiple people sleeping on the floor. It would have had to carefully watch its step to avoid stepping on someone, but it didn't. It walked straight in with purpose. This is less creepy and more on the unexplainable side. I was at work nearing the end of my shift. I was on the second floor when I was walking with a friend when suddenly my arms felt so cold to the point where it was almost as if they were burning. It seriously hurt but wasn't unbearable, and then it subsided. The only thing in my head that made sense in that moment was for some reason check on mom. I called her, and she said she was fine and that it was funny that I called to check on her because my brother had just called to check on her as well. This all took place in like June or July because it was 2 or 3 months from when my grandfather, who I lived with ever since I was in first grade, passed away, so my headspace had been in this spiritual place. I'm not religious by any means. Honestly, I kind of despise religion, but that's just because of the way I grew up with it being pushed onto me. Fast forward 6 to 10 minutes and my mother said my uncle had assaulted her. I was enraged. He was gone when I got home, and my mom, while overall she's fine, her right shoulder is screwed. She can use her arm, but I believe a bunch of ligaments are torn from the altercation. She had it looked at and the doctors said they are surprised she's doing as well as she is because it's as if her arm is barely holding on by shreds. I apologize for this being so lengthy. I feel the need to explain in detail if I'm going to explain at all. Aside from weird dreams, this is one of the most unexplainable things I've experienced. I have no idea why my arms felt the way they did or why my instinct was to contact my mom when she was assaulted mere moments later. I believe we as humans are more than just sacks of meat. We have instincts we can't understand.